The cards hit the table with a sound like bones breaking. Evelyn stood in the doorway of the Trail's End saloon, water bucket forgotten at her feet, watching her brother's hands shake as he reached for the whiskey bottle that had become his closest companion since their father died. Marcus was 26, but looked 40 in the lamplight. Eyes hollowed out by grief and cheap liquor, shoulders bent under debts. He kept promising to pay off with one more hand, one more bet, one more miracle that never came. "I don't have it," Marcus said, and his voice cracked on the last word. "Crow, I swear to you, You thought wrong." Silas Crow didn't raise his voice. He never had to. The man owned half of Red Hollow and controlled the other half through fear and strategic violence. At 42, he'd built an empire on broken backs and foreclosed dreams, a land baron who collected properties the way other men collected scars. "We had an agreement, Mercer. You put up your father's land as collateral. That land is mine now." "The land's not worth what I owe." Marcus's words slurred together. "It's barely 20 acres of dust and rock. You know that." "Then I suppose you should have thought of that before you bet it." Crow leaned back in his chair, gold watch chain glinting across his vest. Everything about him screamed money. The tailored suit from San Francisco, the imported cigars, the rings that had probably graced the fingers of men who disappeared into the desert outside town. "But you're right about one thing. That sorry patch of dirt isn't worth the $3,000 you owe me." The saloon had gone quiet. Even the piano player had stopped mid-song, hands frozen over the keys. Everyone knew what came next when Silas Crow said a debt wasn't settled. The last man who'd welched on a gambling debt had been found outside town with both legs broken. The man before that simply vanished. Evelyn's fingers tightened on the doorframe. She should leave, should walk away before Marcus dragged her any deeper into the hole he'd dug. But her feet wouldn't move. Despite everything, the drinking, the gambling, the years of watching him piss away their father's legacy, he was still her brother. Still the boy who'd taught her to ride, who'd sat beside their mother's grave and promised they'd take care of each other. That promise felt like a noose around her neck now. "I can work it off," Marcus said desperately. "Give me time. I'll work your ranch. Do whatever you need. I don't need another worthless ranch hand." Crow's eyes flicked past Marcus, and Evelyn felt his gaze land on her like a physical weight. "But I might be interested in alternative payment." The room seemed to tilt. Evelyn had known Silas Crow her entire life, the way everyone in Red Hollow knew him, as a presence, a threat, a story mothers told to keep daughters obedient. She'd seen the women who worked in his house, the ones with dead eyes and expensive dresses who never quite met anyone's gaze in town. She'd heard the rumors about his first wife, who died in a convenient riding accident after 6 months of marriage, and his second wife, who'd simply disappeared one night, leaving behind everything she owned. "No," Evelyn said. Her voice came out stronger than she felt. "Whatever you're thinking, the answer is no." Crow smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "Your brother put you on the table, Miss Mercer. Quite literally. Along with the land, his horse, and his dead mother's wedding ring. I'm simply collecting what's owed." "He had no right." "He had every right. You're his dependent, his property, legally speaking." Crow stood, and the men flanking him, hired guns who drifted into downtown over the past year, stood with him. "The way I see it, you have two choices. You can come with me now, we'll have a nice ceremony in the morning, and you'll be Mrs. Silas Crow by noon tomorrow. Or I can take what your brother owes out of his hide, and you can watch him bleed out in this saloon while the sheriff looks the other way." Marcus made a sound like a wounded animal. "Evie, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't think that—" "You never think," Evelyn snapped, but the anger felt hollow. Useless. What good was rage when the trap had already closed? She looked at her brother, really looked at him, and saw not the man he'd become but the boy he'd been, before grief and guilt had eaten him alive. Their father had died owing money. Their mother had followed 6 months later, worked to death trying to pay those debts. And now Marcus had finished what they'd started, gambling away the last scraps of the Mercer family dignity. And she was supposed to be the final payment. "I need an answer, Miss Mercer." Crow pulled out his pocket watch, made a show of checking the time. "It's nearly midnight. I'm a patient man, but my patience has limits." Evelyn's mind raced. She could run. The back door was 10 feet away, and she knew the alleys of Red Hollow better than anyone. But Crow's men were already moving to block the exits, and even if she made it out, where would she go? She had no money, no family beyond Marcus, No friends wealthy enough to hide her from a man like Silas Crow. In a frontier town, a woman alone was prey. A woman who'd humiliated a powerful man was already dead. "I'll marry you," she heard herself say. The words tasted like poison. "But I have conditions." Crow laughed, a sharp, brittle sound that made her skin crawl. "You're not in a position to make conditions, sweetheart. Then you're not in a position to collect." Evelyn forced herself to meet his eyes, to not flinch under that predatory gaze. "You want a wife, not a slave. You want someone who'll smile at your business associates and make you look respectable. I can do that. But if you want me to play the part, we do this right. A proper ceremony. A real wedding dress. Time to say goodbye to my life here." She was stalling, buying time for a miracle she didn't believe in, a rescue that wouldn't come. But even condemned prisoners got last rites, and Evelyn Mercer wasn't going down without extracting every possible second of freedom. Crow studied her, and something like respect flickered across his face. "You've got spine. I'll give you that." He nodded slowly. "Fine. You have until sunrise to get your affairs in order. We'll marry at noon at my ranch. Show up on time, wearing white, with a smile on your face. Don't show up and your brother dies slow. We clear?" "Crystal." "Good." He turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Miss Mercer? Don't get any ideas about running. I own the sheriff, the territorial marshal, and every road out of this town. You run, I'll find you. And when I do, what I had planned for your brother will look like mercy compared to what I'll do to you." The threat hung in the air long after Crow and his men left. The saloon slowly came back to life, piano music resuming, conversations picking up, life moving forward as if Evelyn's world hadn't just ended. She stood there numb while Marcus stumbled toward her, reeking of whiskey and shame. "Evie, I swear I didn't mean—" She slapped him. The crack echoed through the room, and Marcus reeled back, hand to his cheek, eyes wide with shock and hurt. But Evelyn felt nothing. No satisfaction, no relief, just a cold, empty space where hope used to be. "Don't," she said quietly. "Don't apologize. Don't explain. Just don't." She pushed past him and walked out into the night. The bucket lay on its side where she'd dropped it, water soaking into the dust. Above her, stars spread across the Wyoming sky like scattered diamonds, indifferent and eternal. Somewhere out there, people were living ordinary lives, falling in love by choice, building futures that belonged to them. Evelyn had never felt more alone. She walked through Red Hollow's empty streets, past the general store where she'd worked since she was 16, past the boarding house where she rented a corner room that barely fit a bed and a trunk, past the church where her parents were buried in the small cemetery behind the building. Her feet carried her to the edge of town, where the desert stretched out in endless darkness, and she stood there breathing in the cold night air, trying to imagine a version of tomorrow that didn't end with her married to a monster. Nothing came. No brilliant plan, no sudden revelation, just the cold and the dark and the crushing weight of inevitability. "You look like you're about to do something stupid." Evelyn spun around, heart hammering. A man stood behind her, hands in his pockets, silhouetted against the lights of town. Tall, rangy, with the easy stance of someone comfortable with violence. She couldn't make out his face in the darkness, but his voice was low and rough, like gravel under boot heels. "Who the hell are you?" Her hand went to the knife she kept strapped to her thigh, a habit learned from too many nights walking home alone through Red Hollow's less respectable districts. Nobody you need to be afraid of. He stepped closer, and moonlight caught his features. Mid-30s maybe, with dark hair that needed cutting and a face that had seen weather and worse. A scar ran from his left eyebrow to his cheekbone, pale against tanned skin. He wore range clothes, worn denim, a sheepskin coat, scuffed boots, and there was something about the way he moved that reminded Evelyn of the cattle drovers who passed through town, men who lived hard and didn't expect tomorrow. "Name's Colt Maddox. I was in the saloon tonight, heard what happened." "Then you should walk away." Evelyn's hand stayed on her knife. "This isn't your problem." "No," Maddox agreed, "but I'm making it my problem anyway." He pulled out a cigarette, struck a match against his thumbnail. In the brief flare of light, his eyes were startlingly blue. "How much does your brother owe Crow?" $3,000. Might as well be $3 million for all the chance I have of paying it. What if someone paid it for you? Evelyn laughed, a harsh, broken sound. Nobody has that kind of money lying around, and even if they did, why would they waste it on me? I have it. Maddox took a drag from his cigarette, smoke curling into the night air. And I wouldn't call it a waste. You're insane. Probably. He didn't smile. But I'm also serious. I'll pay your brother's debt in full. Crow gets his money, your brother keeps his skin, and you walk away free. It sounded too good to be true, which meant it was. Evelyn had learned that lesson early and often. What's the catch? The catch, Maddox said slowly, is that you marry me instead. The words hung in the air between them. Evelyn stared at this stranger, this man who'd appeared out of nowhere offering salvation with strings attached, and tried to find the trap, the angle, the hidden knife waiting to slide between her ribs. Why? The question came out flat, tired. Why would you do that? I need a wife. Maddox's voice stayed level, matter of fact, like he was discussing livestock prices. I run a ranch up in the mountains about 60 miles north of here. Good land, but isolated. Harsh winters. I've been working it alone for 5 years and it's killing me. I need help, a partner, someone who can handle the work and won't run screaming when things get rough. You need a ranch hand, not a wife. I need both. He met her eyes and there was no guile in his gaze, no hidden cruelty, just exhaustion and something that might have been loneliness. I'm not looking for romance, Miss Mercer. I'm offering a business arrangement, 1 year. You help me get through winter, help me run the ranch, and at the end of 12 months, you're free. I'll give you enough money to start over wherever you want. New city, new life, new name if that's what you need. No obligations beyond that year. And if I refuse, then you marry Crow tomorrow, and I ride back to my ranch alone. Maddox shrugged. Your choice. But I heard what he said in there. I've known men like Silas Crow. They don't want wives. They want possessions. Things to break when they get bored. Evelyn's throat tightened. And you're different? I'm offering you a choice. That's the difference. He dropped his cigarette and ground it under his heel. I'm not going to stand here and pretend I'm some kind of hero. I'm a rancher who needs help, and you're a woman who needs a way out. That's all this is. A trade. But at least with me, you'd be a partner, not property. At least with me, you'd have a chance to walk away when it's done. She wanted to believe him, wanted it so badly it hurt. But Evelyn had learned not to trust men who made promises, especially men who showed up at the perfect moment with perfect solutions. Life didn't work that way. Not for girls from dirt-poor families who'd spent their whole lives one disaster away from destitution. How do I know you're not worse than Crow? You don't. Maddox's honesty was almost startling. You don't know me from Adam, but you have until sunrise to decide. If you want out, meet me at the north end of town, by the old mill. Bring whatever you can carry. We'll ride to the territorial office in Stone Creek, pay off your brother's debt, get married legal, and be gone before Crow knows what happened. If you don't show up, I'll understand. But that offer expires with the sun. He turned to leave and panic clawed at Evelyn's chest. Wait, what if you're lying? What if you just want me for the same reasons Crow does? Maddox paused. Then you'll have a knife and 60 miles of empty country to bury me in. He glanced back at her and something almost like sympathy crossed his face. Look, I get it. Trust is a luxury you can't afford right now, so here's the truth, plain as I can make it. I'm not a good man. I've done things I'm not proud of, but I keep my word, and I don't hurt women. That's the best guarantee I can give you. Take it or leave it. He walked away, swallowed by the darkness, leaving Evelyn alone with an impossible choice. Go with a stranger offering salvation that might be a lie, or marry a monster who'd made his intentions crystal clear. She stood there until the cold seeped through her dress, until her fingers went numb and her breath came out in white clouds. Then she walked back to the boarding house, up the creaking stairs, into her tiny room that held everything she owned in the world. She packed in the dark, clothes, her mother's Bible, the tin of money she'd been saving for years, the photograph of her parents on their wedding day. Everything fit into one battered carpet bag. At dawn, she wrote a note to the woman who ran the boarding house, settling her account. She wrote another note to Marcus, but the words wouldn't come. What could she say? I forgive you? She didn't. I understand? She couldn't. In the end, she wrote 3 words, try to survive. Then she walked through the sleeping town to the old mill. Maddox was waiting, holding the reins of two horses, one for him, one for her. He didn't ask if she was sure, didn't make promises he couldn't keep. He just helped her mount, swung up onto his own horse, and they rode north as the sun broke over the horizon. Behind them, Red Hollow woke to discover that Evelyn Mercer had vanished, and Silas Crow woke to a rage that would burn for months. Massage. The ride to Stone Creek took 6 hours. They didn't talk much. Maddox rode like he'd been born in the saddle, comfortable and easy, while Evelyn tried to remember the last time she'd been on a horse for more than an hour. Her father had taught her young, but years of town living had made her soft. By midday, her legs ached and her back screamed protest. Maddox noticed. He always seemed to notice. They stopped at a creek to water the horses, and he handed her jerky and hardtack without comment. The food was plain but good, and Evelyn ate mechanically, watching this stranger who'd purchased her future. "Tell me about your ranch," she said finally. The silence had become oppressive. "Iron Ridge," Maddox chewed thoughtfully. 600 acres in the high country, good grazing, decent timber, water year-round. I run about 200 head of cattle, some horses. Got a cabin, a barn, a couple of outbuildings. It's not fancy, but it's solid. Why is it called Iron Ridge? Ridge of mountains runs along the western edge of the property. Rock formation looks like rusted iron when the sun hits it right. He glanced at her. It's beautiful country. Harsh, but beautiful. Not for everyone, though. Is that a warning? It's a fact. Maddox stood, brushed crumbs from his pants. Winter at Iron Ridge is no joke. We're at altitude. Snow comes early, stays late. You can be snowed in for weeks, and there's no town nearby, no neighbors, no one to run to if things go bad. It's just you, me, and whatever we can make of it. Sounds lonely. It is. No shame in his admission. That's why I need a partner. They reached Stone Creek by mid-afternoon. It was bigger than Red Hollow, a real town with brick buildings and paved streets, the kind of place that had pretensions of civilization. Maddox led her straight to the territorial office, where a board clerk took their information without interest. Marriage licenses were a formality here. Pay the fee, sign the paper, done. Any objections? The clerk asked, not looking up. No, Evelyn said. Her voice sounded far away. Rings? Maddox pulled out a plain gold band, simple, unadorned, the kind of ring a working man would buy. He slid it onto her finger and it fit perfectly. Evelyn wondered if he'd had it sized, if he'd been planning this for longer than one night, but she didn't ask. Some questions had answers she wasn't ready to hear. Sign here. The clerk pushed papers across the desk. And here, congratulations, you're married. Next, just like that. No ceremony, no vows, no witnesses beyond a clerk who'd already forgotten their faces. Evelyn walked out of that office as Mrs. Colt Maddox, and it felt like falling off a cliff. They stopped at the bank next. Maddox withdrew $3,000 in cash, more money than Evelyn had seen in her entire life, and they rode back toward Red Hollow as the sun started its descent. Evelyn's whole body hurt now, muscles screaming with every step the horse took, but she didn't complain. Pain meant she was still alive, still free, or something close to it. They reached Red Hollow after dark. Maddox insisted on handling Crow alone. He'll want to hurt someone, Maddox said. Better it's me than you. Wait here. He walked into the Trail's End saloon like he owned it, and Evelyn waited in the shadows, heart in her throat, expecting gunfire, expecting blood. But after 10 agonizing minutes, Maddox walked back out, unharmed, and they rode away from Red Hollow for the final time. What happened? Evelyn asked. Gave him the money, told him the debt was paid in full, that you were my wife now, legal and binding. He didn't like it. Maddox's jaw was tight. But he took the money, and he knows that if he comes after you, he comes after me too. That's a fight he's not sure he'd win. He'll come anyway. Men like Crow don't forget being beaten. Let him come. There was iron in Maddox's voice. I didn't spend 5 years building Iron Ridge just to lose it to some territorial gangster who thinks he owns the world. He wants trouble. I'll give him more than he can handle. They rode through the night, putting distance between themselves and Red Hollow. Evelyn dozed in the saddle, exhausted beyond measure, and when she woke, the landscape had changed. They'd climbed into foothills, leaving the flat desert behind. Pine trees replaced sagebrush. The air smelled different, cleaner, colder, sharp with coming winter. "Almost there," Maddox said. Evelyn straightened, trying to see through the pre-dawn darkness. And then, as the sun crested the mountains, she saw it. Iron Ridge Ranch spread across a high valley, nestled between peaks that glowed red gold in the morning light. The cabin was bigger than she'd expected, a solid log structure with a stone chimney and a covered porch. The barn was well maintained, the fences straight and strong. Cattle grazed in distant pastures, and horses moved through a corral like living shadows. It was isolated, remote, miles from anything resembling civilization. It was also the most beautiful place Evelyn had ever seen. "Welcome home," Maddox said, and there was something vulnerable in his voice, like he was waiting for her judgment. Evelyn looked at this man who'd bought her freedom with $3,000 and a gold ring, this stranger who'd become her husband in the span of 24 hours. And she realized that for the first time since her father died, she had something she'd thought lost forever. She had a choice about what came next. "Thank you," she said quietly. Maddox nodded. "Let's get you inside. You look dead on your feet." The cabin's interior was spare but comfortable. One large room served as living area and kitchen, with a stone fireplace dominating the far wall. A door led to what must be the bedroom. Everything was clean, organized, functional. A bachelor's space that had never known a woman's touch. "You take the bedroom," Maddox said, already moving toward the fireplace to start a fire. "I'll sleep out here. We can work out longer-term arrangements later, but for now, you need rest." Evelyn wanted to argue, to insist she could pull her weight immediately. But exhaustion won. She stumbled into the bedroom, collapsed onto the bed still fully dressed, and fell into sleep so deep it felt like drowning. When she woke, night had fallen again. She'd slept through an entire day. Panicked, she rushed out of the bedroom to find Maddox at the table, eating dinner by lamplight. He looked up, unsurprised. "There's stew on the stove," he said. "And coffee. Help yourself." Evelyn filled a bowl with shaking hands, suddenly starving. The stew was simple: beef, potatoes, carrots, but it was hot and good, and she ate like she'd never seen food before. Maddox watched her with something that might have been amusement. "Sorry," Evelyn mumbled around a mouthful of potato. "I didn't mean to, Don't apologize for eating. You've had a rough few days." He stood, refilled her coffee. "We need to talk about how this is going to work." Evelyn's stomach clenched. Here it came, the real terms, the hidden price. "I meant what I said," Maddox continued. "This is a business arrangement. 1 year. You help me run the ranch and I give you a way out of Red Hollow. But there are some things we need to establish, ground rules." "I'm listening. First, your bedroom is yours. I won't enter without permission, period." His voice was firm, brooking no argument. "Second, you pull your weight. I'm not looking for a housekeeper. I need a partner who can ride, shoot, work cattle, and handle herself in rough country. If you can't do something, I'll teach you, but you have to be willing to learn." Evelyn nodded slowly. "What else?" "Third, we're partners, but I have final say on ranch decisions. I've been doing this for 5 years, and I know this land. If I tell you to do something, there's a reason. Trust goes both ways." He paused, choosing words carefully. "And fourth, at the end of the year, you walk away. No questions asked. I'll give you $2,000 and help you get wherever you want to go. That's the deal, clean and simple. And if I want to leave before the year is up, then you leave. I won't stop you." Maddox's eyes were steady. "But the money only comes at the end. Leave early, you leave with what you brought. Fair?" It was more than fair. It was generous to the point of suspicious. Evelyn studied this man who'd upended her life, looking for cracks in the facade, for the moment when the mask would slip and she'd see the monster underneath. But all she saw was exhaustion, loneliness, the face of a man who'd spent too long alone and was trying desperately not to show it. "Fair," she agreed. Maddox relaxed slightly. "Good. We'll start tomorrow. I'll show you the ranch, introduce you to the hands, get you situated. For tonight, just rest. Recover. Tomorrow's soon enough for work." Evelyn finished her stew in silence, then retreated to her bedroom. She lay awake for hours, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the mountain night, wind through pines, distant animal calls, the settling of the cabin's logs. In Red Hollow, She'd fallen asleep to drunken shouts and piano music. Here, the quiet was almost oppressive, but it was also peaceful. For the first time in years, Evelyn Maddox now fell asleep without fear. Morning came with a shock of cold that cut through the bedroom walls like a knife. Evelyn woke to frost on the inside of the window and her breath making clouds in the air. She dressed quickly, layering everything she owned, and emerged from the bedroom to find Maddox already awake, feeding logs into the fireplace. "Coffee's hot," he said without looking up. "Drink it fast. We've got work." The coffee was strong enough to strip paint, bitter and scalding. Evelyn forced it down while Maddox laid out her day. Check the cattle in the near pasture, mend fence on the eastern boundary, haul water for the horses, chop wood. The list went on until Evelyn's head spun with tasks she'd never done, had no idea how to do. "I don't know how to mend fence," she admitted. "Then you're about to learn." Maddox handed her a heavy coat that smelled like leather and wood smoke. "Put this on. Your town clothes won't last a day up here." They worked until Evelyn's hands bled. Maddox showed her how to string barbed wire without shredding her palms, how to sink posts deep enough to survive winter frost heave, how to test tension so the fence wouldn't sag. He was patient, but exacting, correcting her grip, her stance, her technique with the quiet insistence of someone who knew that sloppy work could mean death in country this harsh. By noon, Evelyn's shoulders screamed and her fingers had gone numb despite the gloves Maddox had given her. They ate lunch in the saddle, riding the fence line while Maddox pointed out landmarks. The creek that never froze, the stand of aspens where elk sheltered in storms, the high ridge where cougars sometimes hunted. "You see one, you shoot it," Maddox said. "Don't hesitate. Don't try to scare it off. Just shoot. Understood?" "I don't know how to shoot." Maddox reined his horse to a stop and stared at her. "You're joking. My father thought guns were too dangerous for women." Evelyn felt defensive under his gaze. "I have a knife. I know how to use that." "A knife's useless against a cougar, or a bear, or a man with a rifle." Maddox swung down from his horse, pulled a revolver from his belt. "We're fixing this right now." He spent the next hour teaching her to shoot, setting up bottles on fence posts and standing behind her, correcting her grip, showing her how to absorb the recoil. The gun kicked like a mule, and the noise made her ears ring. She missed the first 6 shots. The 7th shattered a bottle, and Maddox grunted approval. "Better. Keep practicing. By spring, you should be able to hit what you aim at." "Spring? That's months away." "Exactly." Maddox reloaded the revolver, handed it back to her. "Everything takes longer up here. Growing, learning, surviving. You can't rush any of it." They returned to the ranch as the sun touched the mountains. Evelyn had just enough energy left to help Maddox feed the horses before collapsing at the kitchen table, too exhausted to move. Maddox cooked dinner, more stew, with fresh bread he'd apparently baked that morning while she slept, and they ate in silence, broken only by the crackle of the fire. "You did good today," Maddox said eventually. "Better than I expected." "I can barely move. You'll hurt worse tomorrow, but it gets easier." He collected their plates, started washing up. "There are ranch hands who help during summer. 3 men, Jack, Thomas, and Samuel. Good workers, but they head down to warmer territory come October. It'll be just us until spring." "Just us," Evelyn repeated. The words felt heavy, final. "You having second thoughts?" Evelyn considered lying, but she was too tired. "I'm having all the thoughts, but I'm still here. That's all I ask." Maddox dried the last plate, hung it on the shelf. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow we're riding to the high pasture. Longer day. Colder. You'll need your strength." Evelyn stumbled to bed and fell asleep before her head hit the pillow. The days blurred together after that. Each morning brought new tasks, new skills to learn, new ways for Evelyn to discover how little she knew about survival beyond town walls. Maddox taught her to rope cattle, to identify sick animals, to predict weather by watching clouds and smelling the air. He taught her to ride properly, not the side saddle posture of town ladies, but the hard, practical riding of someone who needed to cover ground fast. Her thighs screamed protest for a week, then slowly hardened into muscle. The ranch hands returned for one last push before winter. Jack was in his 50s, weathered and taciturn, with eyes that had seen too much and forgiven too little. Thomas was younger, maybe 30, with an easy smile and hands scarred from years of rope work. Samuel was barely 20, still carrying baby fat under his sunburned face, eager to prove himself. They treated Evelyn with careful politeness at first, the kind reserved for bosses' wives who didn't belong in working spaces. She hated it, hated being seen as decorative, useless, so she worked harder. When they moved cattle to winter pasture, Evelyn rode drag, eating dust and chasing stragglers until her throat was raw. When they repaired the barn roof, she climbed the ladder and hauled shingles until her arms shook. When they slaughtered a steer for winter meat, she didn't flinch from the blood and the butchering, even though her stomach turned. Jack noticed first. She was wrestling with a stubborn fence post, trying to leverage it into position, when he appeared beside her without a word and added his weight to hers. The post sank home, and Jack grunted approval. "You got sand," he said. "Didn't think you would." It was the first real thing any of them had said to her. That night, around the fire outside the bunkhouse, they dealt her into their poker game. Evelyn took their money with the skills Marcus had taught her before gambling became his poison, and Thomas laughed so hard he nearly fell off his stump. "Boss, your wife's a card sharp," he called to Maddox. "I noticed." Maddox was cleaning his rifle, methodical and unhurried. "Don't bet what you can't afford to lose." "Bit late for that advice," Samuel muttered, staring at his empty pockets. Evelyn felt something unfamiliar warm her chest. Not quite happiness, but something close. Acceptance, maybe. The sense that she was becoming part of something instead of just existing adjacent to it. The hands left a week later, heading south before the snows came. Jack shook Evelyn's hand with genuine respect, and Thomas told her to stay tough, and Samuel gave her his best gloves because hers were falling apart. Then it was just Evelyn and Maddox again, staring at a winter that promised to bury them both. The first snow came in late October, a light dusting that melted by noon. The second came 3 days later and stayed. Within a week, the valley wore 6 inches of white, and the temperature dropped so low that water froze in the pipes overnight. Maddox showed Evelyn how to bank the fire so it burned all night, how to wrap pipes in rags and straw, how to break ice on the water troughs so the cattle could drink. They settled into rhythms. Maddox woke at dawn to start the fire and make coffee. Evelyn cooked breakfast while he fed the horses. They worked together through the short daylight hours, then returned to the cabin as darkness fell. Evenings were quiet. Maddox would read by lamplight, books about animal husbandry and range management and histories of the territory. Evelyn would sew or knit, trying to keep their clothes intact through constant wear and tear. Sometimes they talked. Small things at first. Evelyn learned that Maddox had grown up in Kansas, that he'd served in the cavalry, that he'd drifted west after the war looking for something he couldn't name. He'd found this valley by accident, claimed the land legally when most men were still taking what they wanted at gunpoint, and spent 5 years turning wilderness into something resembling civilization. "Why alone?" Evelyn asked one night. "Why not find a wife the normal way?" Maddox was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "I tried, 3 years ago, met a woman in Stone Creek, school teacher, smart, pretty, seemed like she could handle ranch life. I courted her proper, flowers, dinners, the whole performance. She agreed to marry me." "What happened?" "I brought her up here. She lasted 2 weeks. Maddox's voice stayed level, but something flickered in his eyes. The isolation broke her. The silence, the cold. She'd wake up crying in the middle of the night, begging to go back to town. So I took her back. Paid for her ticket east. Haven't seen her since." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. She wasn't wrong. This place isn't for everyone." He looked at Evelyn then, really looked at her. "That's why I needed someone already running from something. Someone who understood that safety isn't comfortable. It's just less dangerous than the alternative." Evelyn felt the weight of that truth. She'd been at Iron Ridge for 2 months now, and she was still alive, still working, still waking up without fear that today would be the day someone hurt her. That was more than she'd had in Red Hollow. "Do you miss it?" Maddox asked. "Town?" "No." The answer came fast and certain. "I miss having people around. I miss conversation that isn't about cattle and weather. But the town itself? The constant watching, the gossip, the feeling like everyone was waiting for me to fail?" She shook her head. "I don't miss that at all." "What do you miss?" "Music." Evelyn smiled slightly. "There was a piano player at the saloon. He was drunk most of the time, but sometimes he'd play these beautiful pieces. Classical stuff, I think. I'd sit outside and listen when I couldn't sleep. I don't have a piano. I noticed. Maddox stood, walked to a trunk in the corner. He pulled out something wrapped in cloth, brought it back to the table. When he unwrapped it, Evelyn saw a harmonica, old, worn, but well-maintained. I'm not good, Maddox said. But it's something. He played haltingly, a simple melody that might have been a hymn or a folk song. The notes were rough, imperfect, but they filled the cabin with something other than silence. Evelyn felt her throat tighten unexpectedly. When he finished, she said, "Thank you." Maddox just nodded and put the harmonica away. November brought heavier snows and shorter days. They were snowed in for a week straight, unable to reach even the near pasture. The cattle would have to fend for themselves, finding shelter in the trees and pawing through snow for dead grass. Evelyn learned that helplessness was part of ranching. You did what you could, and you accepted what you couldn't control. She also learned that being trapped in a small cabin with another person tested patience in ways she hadn't anticipated. Maddox had habits that drove her crazy, the way he cracked his knuckles, the way he left his boots exactly where someone would trip over them, the way he went silent for hours, lost in thoughts he never shared. And she knew she irritated him too, with her restless energy, her inability to sit still, her tendency to hum while she worked. But they didn't fight. They navigated around each other with the careful courtesy of people who knew that anger, once unleashed, had nowhere to go in space this small. When the storm finally broke, they dug out paths to the barn and checked the herd. They'd lost 3 calves and 1 older cow. Maddox took it stoically, but Evelyn saw the tightness around his eyes. Every loss hurt. Every death was money they couldn't afford to waste. "It's part of it," Maddox said when he caught her staring. "You can't save them all. You just try to save more than you lose." December arrived with cold so intense that Evelyn's lungs ached with every breath outside. They ventured out only for essential chores, moving fast, working efficient. The rest of the time they huddled by the fire, rationing firewood, making each log last as long as possible. Christmas came and went without fanfare. Evelyn had almost forgotten the date until she woke to find a package on the kitchen table. Inside was a new pair of gloves. Real working gloves. Thick leather with wool lining. Better than anything she'd owned. "Merry Christmas," Maddox said from the fireplace. Evelyn felt embarrassed that she had nothing for him. But then she remembered the shirt she'd been mending, the one with buttons she'd carved from shed elk antler. She'd done it to pass time, not thinking it was a gift. Now she wrapped it quickly in old newspaper and handed it over. Maddox unwrapped it slowly, examined the buttons with something like wonder. "You made these?" "Found the antler by the creek. Seemed wasteful not to use it." "These are good." He put the shirt on immediately, and Evelyn felt absurdly pleased that it fit. "Real good. Thank you." They ate venison stew and day-old biscuits for Christmas dinner, and it was the best meal Evelyn had eaten in years. January tested them. The temperature dropped so low that breath froze in midair, turning beards to ice and making bare skin stick to metal. They lost 2 more cattle to the cold despite their best efforts. The barn roof developed a leak that they couldn't fix without risking frostbite. Evelyn developed a cough that wouldn't quit, and Maddox brewed foul-tasting tea from pine needles and forced her to drink it until the cough subsided. They were running low on supplies. Coffee was down to dust at the bottom of the can. Flour was nearly gone. They had meat, thank everything, and some canned goods, but variety had become a memory. Evelyn dreamed of fresh fruit, of bread that wasn't mostly sawdust, of anything that didn't taste like survival. 2 more months, Maddox said. Then the thaw comes and we can get to Stone Creek for supplies. 2 months felt like forever, but they endured. And slowly, something shifted between them. The careful politeness evolved into genuine partnership. They developed shorthand, a look that meant check the barn, a gesture that meant I'll handle this, a shared silence that was comfortable instead of awkward. Evelyn started anticipating what Maddox needed before he asked. Maddox started noticing when Evelyn was struggling and stepping in without making it obvious. They were becoming a team. One night in late January, a blizzard hit with such ferocity that the cabin shook. Snow piled against the door faster than they could clear it. The wind screamed like something alive and angry. They fed the fire constantly, burning wood they'd saved for emergencies, knowing that without heat, they'd die before morning. The chimney started smoking backwards, filling the cabin with choking clouds. Maddox climbed onto the roof in near-zero visibility to clear the blockage, while Evelyn held a lantern and prayed the wind wouldn't take him. When he finally climbed down, half frozen and coughing, Evelyn grabbed him by the shoulders. "Don't ever do that again," she said fiercely. "If you die up there, I die down here. You understand? We survive together, or not at all." Maddox stared at her, snow melting in his hair, and something passed between them that had nothing to do with their arrangement. Then he nodded. Together. The storm lasted 3 days. When it finally passed, they were out of firewood, out of most food, down to melting snow for water. But they were alive. February brought the first hints of thaw. Days stayed brutally cold, but occasionally the sun would break through and temperatures would climb above freezing for a few hours. Icicles dripped. Snow developed a crust. The cattle moved more freely, finding patches of exposed grass. Maddox and Evelyn did inventory. They'd lost 12 head total over the winter. Bad, but not catastrophic. The horses were thin but healthy. The buildings had survived mostly intact. They'd made it. "You did good," Maddox said. They were standing on the porch, watching sunset paint the mountains red and gold. "Better than good. You saved us at least 3 times this winter." "You saved me more than that." "Wasn't counting." Maddox pulled out his tobacco pouch, rolled a cigarette. "But I meant what I said at the beginning. You're a partner, Evelyn. Not hired help, not some obligation I'm stuck with. A real partner. This ranch is as much yours as mine." Evelyn felt something crack in her chest. Not breaking. Opening. "I never thanked you for Red Hollow, for getting me out. You've thanked me every day by being here, by not running, by choosing this even when it got hard." He lit his cigarette, smoke curling into the cold air. "I know this wasn't what you wanted. I know you're here because you had no other choice. But you made something of it anyway. That takes courage." "I was terrified," Evelyn admitted. "I still am, sometimes. Terrified that Crow will come. Terrified that I'll fail at something and the whole thing will collapse. Terrified that when the year is up, I won't know what to do with freedom." "We'll figure it out," Maddox said. "We've got time." But time, as it turned out, was about to run out. The rider appeared on a clear March morning when the snow had finally retreated enough to make travel possible. Evelyn spotted him first, just a dark shape moving across the white valley, still miles out, but heading directly for the ranch. She called Maddox, and he grabbed his rifle without a word. They watched the rider approach. He took his time, letting them see he was alone, unarmed, except for a holstered sidearm. When he got close enough, Evelyn recognized him. Thomas. One of the summer hands. Maddox lowered his rifle but didn't put it away. Thomas rode up to the porch and dismounted stiffly, like he'd been riding hard for days. "Boss," Thomas said. "Ma'am, I'm sorry to bring trouble, but you need to know. Crow's coming." Evelyn felt the bottom drop out of her stomach. "How do you know?" "I was in Red Hollow last week. Heard him talking in the saloon. He's been planning this all winter, spreading rumors that you were kidnapped, that Maddox forced you into marriage, that the land here is legally questionable. He's got the territorial marshal believing it." "The marshal?" Maddox's voice went flat. "Morrison's in Crow's pocket?" "Deep. Crow's paying him good money to look the other way." Thomas pulled out a folded paper from his coat. "And there's this. Crow filed a claim on your land. Says he has documents proving your deed is fraudulent, that this territory was promised to him by some defunct mining company." Maddox took the paper, read it quickly. His jaw clenched. "This is garbage. My deed is legitimate. I bought this land legal from the territorial office. Doesn't matter if the marshal rules against you. Crow's got witnesses lined up ready to testify however he wants. He's building a case, boss, and he's planning to serve papers soon as the pass clears." "Why?" Evelyn's voice shook. "Why now? He got his money. The debt's paid." "Pride." Thomas looked uncomfortable. "You embarrassed him. Whole territory heard about it, how some nobody rancher outbid him for a woman he'd already claimed. Crow's spent months telling anyone who'll listen that Maddox stole what belonged to him. It's not about money anymore. It's about power, about making an example." Maddox was quiet for a long moment. Then, "When?" "Marshall's planning to ride up here within 2 weeks. Maybe sooner if the weather holds. Crow will be with him, along with hired guns. They're going to evict you both, arrest Evelyn on some trumped-up charge, and take the ranch. Over my dead body. That's what Crow's counting on. Thomas met Maddox's eyes. He wants you to fight, wants an excuse to kill you legal-like, with the marshal as witness. Then he gets the land, the woman, and nobody questions it because you were a criminal resisting lawful authority. Evelyn felt sick. She'd brought this. Her escape, her presence here, it had all been a lit fuse leading straight to explosion. We have to run. No. Maddox's voice was iron. I won't abandon 5 years of work because some land-grabbing bastard wants what's mine. This is my home. Our home. I'm not giving it up without a fight. Then you'll die. Thomas looked apologetic but certain. Crow's got money, guns, and the law. You've got a rifle and stubbornness. Math doesn't work in your favor, boss. Math's never worked in my favor. Maddox handed the paper back to Thomas. But I'm still here, yeah, and I'm going to stay here. You ride back and tell anyone who asks, Colt Maddox isn't running. If Crow wants Iron Ridge, he can come take it. But he better bring enough men to finish the job. Thomas shook his head. You're making a mistake. Probably, but it's my mistake to make. Maddox looked at Evelyn. You should go with Thomas. Head to Stone Creek, then catch a stage east. I'll give you money, enough to start over somewhere Crow can't reach you. No? Evelyn's voice surprised her with its steadiness. I'm staying. Evelyn, you heard what he said. They're coming for both of us. Running just delays it, and I'm not leaving you to face this alone. She met his eyes, willing him to understand. You gave me a choice when no one else would. You treated me like a partner, like an equal. I'm not abandoning that now. We survived together or not at all, remember? Maddox stared at her, and something fierce and almost frightened crossed his face. Then he nodded once, sharp and final. Together. Thomas mounted his horse, looking between them like they'd both lost their minds. Maybe they had. But Evelyn felt strangely calm, clear-headed. For the first time since Marcus bet her future at a card table, she was choosing her own path, even if that path led straight into violence. I'll spread word, Thomas said. Jack and Samuel will want to know. Maybe we can round up some help. Don't get yourself killed on my account, Maddox said. But if you know anyone who owes Crow a grudge, tell them there's about to be a reckoning. Thomas rode out, and Evelyn and Maddox stood on the porch watching him disappear into the distance. The sun was bright. The air smelled like pine and melting snow. Spring was coming. And with it, war. We need to prepare, Maddox said finally. Check ammunition. Reinforce the cabin. Move the horses to the back pasture where they're harder to reach. He paused. And you need to practice shooting every day until you can hit a man-sized target at 100 yards. I can do that. I know you can. Maddox turned to her, and his expression was raw, honest. I need you to understand something. This isn't your fight. Crow's coming for me, for this land. You don't owe me enough to die for it. You're wrong. Evelyn reached out, touched his arm. This became my fight the moment I chose to stay. This ranch is as much mine as yours now. You said so yourself. And I'm not letting some territorial thug take it because he's got a wounded ego. You could die. So could you. So could anyone. Evelyn smiled slightly. At least if I die here, I die free. That's more than I had in Red Hollow. Maddox pulled her into a sudden, fierce embrace. Evelyn stiffened in surprise, then relaxed into it, wrapping her arms around him. They stood there on the porch while the sun climbed higher, two people who'd been strangers 6 months ago, now bound by something stronger than any contract. When they finally pulled apart, Maddox's eyes were bright. If we survive this, I'm burning that damned agreement, the one that says you leave after a year. What will you replace it with? Nothing. No agreements, no obligations, just a choice. His voice dropped. Stay because you want to, not because you owe me, not because you're running from something, but because this is home. Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes. Ask me again when this is over. Deal. They spent the next week preparing for war. Maddox taught Evelyn to shoot with brutal efficiency, drilling her until she could hit targets reliably, even with hands shaking from cold or fear. They stockpiled ammunition, reinforced the cabin windows with heavy shutters, moved valuable supplies into the cellar where they'd be protected. Evelyn learned to reload rifles fast, to field strip and clean weapons, to think tactically about cover and firing positions. Jack and Samuel showed up 3 days before the marshal was expected. They'd brought 2 other men, ranch hands from neighboring spreads who'd had their own run-ins with Crow's land-grabbing schemes. 5 men and 1 woman against however many Crow brought. The odds were still terrible, but they were better than 2 against the world. "Heard you were planning something stupid," Jack said to Maddox. "Figured you could use company." "I can pay—" "Shut up about money. Crow's been a cancer on this territory for too long. Time someone cut it out." Jack looked at Evelyn. "Ma'am, you sure about this?" "I'm sure." "Good enough for me." They planned. They strategized. They positioned themselves around the ranch with overlapping fields of fire, and they waited. The marshal arrived on a cold morning with 8 men. Crow rode at his side, dressed like he was attending a social event, smiling that predatory smile Evelyn remembered from the saloon. They stopped at the edge of rifle range, and the marshal called out, "Colt Maddox, you're ordered to surrender yourself and the woman for questioning regarding fraudulent land claims and kidnapping." Maddox stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand, but pointed at the ground. "Marshal Morrison, I'm surprised to see you doing Crow's dirty work so openly." "This is legal business, Maddox. Don't make it harder than it needs to be." "Legal?" Maddox's laugh was harsh. "Crow's been spreading lies for months, and you're here to enforce them. How much did he pay you, Morrison? How much is my land worth to you?" "You're in violation of territorial law. Surrender now, and this goes peacefully." "No." Maddox's voice carried across the snow. "This is my land, legally purchased and defended. You want it, you'll have to take it, and I guarantee it'll cost more than Crow paid you." Crow urged his horse forward a few steps, and Evelyn saw the fury in his eyes even from a distance. "Give me the woman, Maddox. She belongs to me. Was promised to me before you interfered." "She belongs to herself," Maddox shot back, "and she chose to stay here, live with it." "Then you'll die with it." Crow turned to the marshal. "They're resisting lawful authority. Use whatever force necessary." The marshal hesitated. Maybe he hadn't expected actual resistance. Maybe he'd thought the show of force would be enough. But he'd taken Crow's money, and that came with obligations. "Last chance, Maddox." "Go to hell." The marshal drew his weapon, and the world exploded into gunfire. Evelyn dropped behind the water trough the instant the marshal's gun cleared leather. The first shots went wild, panic fire from men who hadn't expected actual resistance. Then Jack opened up from the barn loft, and one of Crow's hired guns went down screaming, clutching his shoulder. The fight wasn't like the stories Evelyn had heard in Red Hollow, where gunfighters faced off in streets and settled matters in seconds. This was chaos, smoke and noise and the crack of rifles echoing off the mountains, men shouting, horses screaming, the acrid smell of burnt powder thick enough to choke on. Maddox fired from behind the porch railing, methodical and calm, each shot deliberate. Samuel was at the corner of the cabin, reloading with shaking hands. The other ranch hands had positions in the barn and behind the corral fence, creating crossfire that made Crow's men hesitate to advance. But hesitation only lasted so long. One of the hired guns made a run for the cabin, using his horse as cover. Evelyn tracked him with her rifle, hand steady despite the hammering of her heart. And when he broke from cover, she squeezed the trigger. The recoil slammed her shoulder, and the man went down hard. Not dead, but out of the fight. She'd aimed for his leg, couldn't bring herself to kill, but Maddox had been right. When the moment came, she didn't hesitate. "Reload!" Maddox's voice cut through the noise, and Evelyn's hands moved automatically, muscle memory from a week of constant drilling. Eject the spent cartridge, slot in a fresh one, bring the rifle back up. She'd done it 100 times in practice. Now it might keep her alive. The marshal and his men had scattered, taking cover behind rocks and trees at the edge of the clearing. Crow had retreated entirely, sitting his horse well back from the shooting, content to let others do his dying. Evelyn caught glimpses of him through the smoke, that handsome face twisted with fury, and she felt a cold satisfaction. He'd expected easy prey. He'd found a fight. "They're flanking left," Jack's voice carried from the barn. "Samuel, watch your side." Samuel swung his rifle around, fired twice at movement in the trees. Someone cursed, and the movement stopped. But the pressure was building. Crow had brought 8 men plus the marshal. Even with 2 down, they had numbers, and numbers would win eventually. "We can't hold them forever," Samuel shouted. His voice cracked with fear, and Evelyn remembered he was barely older than her brother. Just a kid trying not to die. Don't have to! Maddox fired again, then dropped back to reload. Just have to make it too expensive. They're hired guns, not soldiers. They'll break when enough of them bleed. But would they break fast enough? Evelyn's ammunition was already running low. She had maybe 20 rounds left, and at this rate they'd be gone in minutes. Then what? Knives? Rocks? Praying that Jack and the others had enough bullets to finish it? A flash of movement caught her eye. One of the hired guns had worked his way around to the side of the cabin, using the barn as cover. He was raising his rifle, aiming at Maddox's exposed back, and Evelyn didn't think. She just swung her own rifle around and fired. The shot took him in the chest. He dropped without a sound, and Evelyn stared at what she'd done, at the man she'd just killed, and her stomach lurched. All the practice in the world hadn't prepared her for the reality of watching someone fall because of her, watching the way his body went slack, the way blood spread across snow. Evie! Maddox's voice snapped her back. Stay focused. You did good, but we're not done. She forced herself to look away from the body, forced herself to breathe, to reload, to scan for the next threat. There would be time to fall apart later, if there was a later. The gunfire slowed. Both sides were getting cautious, conserving ammunition, waiting for openings. The marshal called out from behind a boulder, voice strained. Maddox, this is madness. Surrender now and I'll see you get a fair trial. Fair trial from a man on Crow's payroll? Maddox laughed, but there was no humor in it. How stupid do you think I am, Morrison? You've already killed 2 men. That's murder. You're making this worse for yourself. They came onto my land with guns drawn. That's not murder. That's defense. Maddox ejected a spent casing, the brass tinkling against the porch boards. You want to arrest someone? Arrest Crow for filing false claims and bribing a territorial officer. Or are you too deep in his pocket to remember what the law actually means? Silence. Then Crow's voice, sharp with venom. Burn them out! Set fire to the barn! The hell you will! That was Jack, and his rifle cracked 3 times fast. Someone yelped, and there was frantic scrambling in the trees, but the idea had been planted. Evelyn saw it in the way Crow's remaining men started looking at each other, calculating. The cabin was log, hard to burn, but the barn was older, drier. A few torches and the whole thing would go up. Then Jack would have to run or roast, and they'd lose their strongest position. Jack, Maddox called. Fall back to the cabin. Now! They'll take the barn. Better the barn than your life. Move! Jack came out of the loft fast, half falling down the ladder, and sprinted across the open space toward the cabin. Bullets kicked up snow around his feet, but he made it, diving behind the water trough next to Evelyn. He was breathing hard, face streaked with powder burns. Damn fool, he muttered. Should have stayed in Texas. Too late now, Evelyn said, and Jack barked a laugh despite everything. With Jack pulled back, Crow's men advanced on the barn. They moved careful, weapons ready, expecting traps. But there were no traps. Just an empty building they could now use for cover or destroy to demoralize the defenders. Evelyn watched them disappear inside and felt something twist in her gut. They were losing ground, losing options. Then she heard hoofbeats. Everyone heard them. The shooting stopped as heads turned toward the sound. A rider was coming fast up the valley road, pushing his horse hard, and Evelyn's heart sank. Reinforcements. Crow had brought reinforcements, but the rider wasn't heading for Crow's position. He was riding straight for the cabin, and as he got closer, Evelyn recognized him. Marcus. Her brother pulled up hard, horse-lathering and wild-eyed, and half fell out of the saddle. He was thinner than she remembered, haggard, but his eyes were clear, sober. He stumbled toward the porch, hands raised to show he was unarmed. Evie, don't shoot. It's me. What the hell are you doing here? Evelyn's voice came out harsher than she meant. She hadn't seen Marcus since the night she'd left Red Hollow, hadn't wanted to see him. He'd gambled her away, sold her to a monster. And now he showed up in the middle of a firefight like that could somehow make things right. I came to help. Marcus reached the porch, breathing hard. I know I don't deserve it. I know you hate me. But I had to. I couldn't just... He stopped, gathered himself. Crow's planning to kill you both no matter what happens here. He told me himself. Even if you surrender, even if the marshal arrests you, you won't make it to trial. There'll be an accident on the road, a convenient escape attempt. He wants you dead, Evie, and he wants this land. Tell me something I don't know, Maddox said. His rifle stayed trained on Marcus. And tell me fast why I shouldn't shoot you for bringing this down on us. Because I can stop it. Marcus pulled something from his coat, papers, folded and worn. Crow's been running a fraud scheme for years, bribing officials, forging documents, intimidating witnesses. I've been working for him since you left, Evie, doing his bookkeeping. I have proof. Letters, account ledgers, names and dates. Everything you'd need to bury him legally. Evelyn stared at her brother. Why? Why would you help us now? Because I'm tired of being a coward. Marcus met her eyes, and she saw shame there, and pain, and something that might have been hope. You were right to hate me. I destroyed our family. I destroyed you. I've spent months trying to drink myself to death because I couldn't face what I'd done. But then I heard Crow planning this, heard him talking about burning you out and making it look legal, and I realized I had one chance, one shot at doing something right. You expect me to believe you suddenly grew a conscience? Maddox's voice was ice. No, I expect you to use me. Marcus held out the papers. Take these. Get them to someone who isn't on Crow's payroll. A real judge, a federal marshal, someone. Expose him. Destroy him. I don't care what happens to me, but Evie doesn't deserve to die for my mistakes. Gunfire erupted again, closer now. Crow's men were using the barn as a staging point, preparing for a final push. They had the numbers, the position, the momentum. In minutes, they'd overrun the cabin. Maddox snatched the papers from Marcus, shoved them inside his coat without looking at them. You better be telling the truth, because if this is some play of Crow's, I'll kill you myself. It's not. I swear on our parents' graves, Evie, it's real. Evelyn wanted to believe him, wanted to think her brother had finally found some scrap of integrity buried under all that guilt and whiskey. But trust wasn't something she could afford. Not anymore. Fine, she said coldly. You want to help? Grab a rifle. You know how to shoot? Not really. Then you'll learn fast or die slow. Your choice. Marcus took the rifle Jack handed him with shaking hands. He looked terrified. Good. Maybe fear would keep him alive long enough to be useful. They're coming! Samuel's shout cut through the tension. At least 4 of them, using the barn for cover. Maddox moved to the edge of the porch, rifle up, eyes scanning. Everyone hold your fire until they're committed. Let them think we're out of ammunition, then we hit them all at once. The hired guns advanced in a rush, emboldened by the silence from the cabin. They'd almost reached the water trough when Maddox's voice rang out. Now! 5 rifles opened up simultaneously. The attackers scattered, diving for cover, but 2 went down before they could retreat. One didn't get up, the other crawled back toward the barn, leaving a red trail in the snow. Reload! Maddox's voice was hoarse now, worn down by smoke and shouting. They'll try again! But they didn't. The attack broke, Crow's remaining men pulling back to regroup. Through the smoke, Evelyn could see the marshal arguing with Crow, gesturing at the bodies, at the cabin. The math had changed. What was supposed to be an easy eviction had become a bloodbath, and hired guns didn't get paid enough to die for someone else's grudge. Crow was shouting something, his face purple with rage, but the marshal was already backing away, hands raised in a placating gesture. Then he turned his horse and started riding back down the valley, and 3 of the surviving hired guns went with him. That left Crow with 2 men, 3 against 6. For the first time since the shooting started, the odds weren't stacked against the cabin. Crow sat his horse at the edge of rifle range, staring at the cabin with pure hatred. Then he turned and rode after the marshal, his remaining men following. They disappeared around the bend, and silence fell over Iron Ridge like snow. Nobody moved for a long moment. Then Jack let out a shaky breath. Is it over? No. Maddox's voice was flat. He'll be back. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but he'll be back. Men like Crow don't forget, and they don't forgive. Evelyn lowered her rifle, her arms shaking from adrenaline and exhaustion. Bodies lay in the snow where they'd fallen, 3 dead, maybe more. She'd killed one of them. That knowledge sat in her stomach like a stone, heavy and cold and impossible to ignore. We need to move those bodies, Jack said quietly, and figure out what the hell we do next. First, we secure the perimeter. Maddox was already moving, checking sight lines, looking for vulnerabilities. Samuel, watch the road. Anyone comes back, you yell. Thomas, help me check the barn. Marcus, he stopped, looked at Evelyn's brother. You stay where I can see you. They worked through the afternoon, moving bodies behind the barn where they wouldn't be visible from the road, treating wounds, taking inventory of ammunition and supplies. They were low on everything. The fight had burned through their reserves, and winter wasn't done with them yet. That evening, they gathered in the cabin. 6 people in a space meant for 1, maybe 2. Evelyn made coffee from the dregs of their supply, while the men sat around the table, exhausted and silent. Marcus stood apart, still holding the rifle he hadn't fired, looking lost. Maddox pulled out the papers Marcus had brought and spread them on the table. Letters in Crow's handwriting, detailing bribes to territorial officials. Ledgers showing payments to the marshal, to claim office clerks, to witnesses who'd testified in land disputes. A web of corruption laid bare in ink and numbers. This is good, Maddox said slowly. Damn good. If we can get this to the right people, Crow's finished. If, Jack said. That's a big if. Who do we trust? The territorial marshal's dirty. The local judges are probably on his payroll, and we can't exactly ride to the capital with Crow hunting us. There's a federal marshal in Cheyenne, Thomas said. Name's Coleman. Supposed to be honest. If we could reach him, Cheyenne's 2 weeks' ride, Maddox interrupted. And Crow will have men watching every road out of here. We'd never make it. Then we're trapped. Samuel's voice was hollow. We can't stay here forever. Eventually we'll run out of food, ammunition, something, and Crow just has to wait. The hopelessness in the room was thick enough to taste. They'd survived the first attack, but it had cost them everything. Resources they couldn't replace, position they couldn't hold indefinitely. Crow could afford to wait. They couldn't. There might be another way. Marcus spoke for the first time since the shooting. Everyone turned to look at him. Crow's throwing a party. 3 weeks from now. Big celebration at his ranch. He does it every year. All the territorial officials will be there. Judges, marshals, land office people. Everyone he's got in his pocket. So what? Jack's voice was hard. We crash his party and accuse him in front of his own guests? That's exactly what we do. Marcus stepped forward, warming to the idea. Crow's power comes from fear and secrecy. Everyone knows he's corrupt, but nobody has proof, and nobody wants to be the first to speak up. But if we show up with evidence, in front of witnesses, he can't intimidate all at once, force him to answer charges publicly. He can't kill everyone who hears it. Some of those officials are genuinely honest. They're just scared. Give them cover, give them proof, and Crow's empire collapses. That's insane, Maddox said. But he didn't dismiss it outright, and Evelyn could see him thinking, calculating angles. It's our only shot. Marcus looked at his sister. Evie, I know you don't trust me. I know I don't deserve a second chance. But this could work. If nothing else, it'll force Crow to either admit his crimes or make a move that exposes him. Or it'll get us all killed. Evelyn's voice was tired. She wanted to reject the plan out of hand, wanted nothing to do with anything her brother suggested. But Marcus wasn't wrong. They couldn't hide at Iron Ridge forever, and they couldn't fight Crow's money and connections with guns alone. They needed to break his power at its source. We'd be outnumbered 100 to 1, Jack pointed out. Walking into his territory, surrounded by his people. Even if we don't get shot on sight, what's to stop him from having us arrested before we can say anything? Nothing. Maddox leaned back in his chair, eyes distant. Unless we make sure everyone at that party knows we're coming and why. Send word ahead. Make it public. Put Crow in a position where he has to respond openly instead of making us disappear quietly. You're actually considering this. Evelyn couldn't believe what she was hearing. I'm considering everything. Maddox met her eyes. We won today. Barely. Next time Crow comes with more men, better prepared, and we're still low on everything. We can fortify, we can fight, but eventually we lose. This plan, he tapped the papers on the table. This plan ends it, one way or another. By getting us killed, maybe. But at least we'd go down swinging. Maddox's smile was grim. And we'd take Crow with us. That's more than most people in this territory can say. The room fell silent. Everyone was looking at Evelyn, waiting for her vote. It was her life on the line as much as anyone's. More, maybe, since Crow wanted her specifically. This wasn't just about land or pride anymore. This was personal. She thought about Red Hollow, about the night Marcus gambled her future away, about Maddox stepping out of the shadows with an impossible offer, about winter at Iron Ridge, Learning to survive, learning to shoot, learning that she was stronger than she'd ever imagined. About standing on the porch this morning, watching men die because she'd chosen freedom over submission. She'd made her choice months ago. Everything since then had just been following through. "We do it," Evelyn said. "But not the way Marcus suggested. We don't crash the party. We get invited." "How?" Thomas asked. "Crow wants me." Evelyn's voice was steady now, certain. "He's wanted me since the night I left Red Hollow. What if I gave him what he wanted? What if I wrote to him, said I was tired of hiding, that I wanted to negotiate a settlement? That I'd come to his party and discuss terms in front of witnesses?" "Absolutely not." Maddox was on his feet. "That's suicide." "No, it's strategy." Evelyn stood to face him. "Crow's ego won't let him turn down a public surrender. He'll want me there, want to parade me around as proof that he always wins. And once we're at that party, surrounded by territorial officials, we present the evidence. Not as criminals making accusations, but as victims seeking justice. We control the narrative." "She's right." Marcus looked surprised to be agreeing. "Crow won't be able to resist. He'll see it as his final victory. And by the time he realizes what's happening, it'll be too late." "It's too dangerous," Maddox insisted. "Once you're at his ranch, he owns the ground. He could do anything. He could do anything now." Evelyn reached out, took Maddox's hand. "But this way we have a chance. A real chance to end this without waiting for him to starve us out or burn us out or pick us off one by one." Maddox stared at her, his jaw working like he wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. Finally, he shook his head. "I don't like it." "You don't have to like it. You just have to trust me." Evelyn squeezed his hand. "I'm not that scared girl from Red Hollow anymore. You helped make sure of that. Now, let me use what you taught me." "She's not going alone," Jack said suddenly. "If we're doing this, we all go. Show of force. Crow wants a spectacle, we'll give him one. But we go armed. We go together, and we make damn sure every person at that party knows that if anything happens to us, the evidence gets released anyway." "An insurance policy." Thomas nodded slowly. "Copies of the documents sent to newspapers, to honest officials, to anyone we can think of, with instructions to publish if we don't check in." "Exactly." Marcus was warming to the plan now, talking faster. "We make Crow's victory conditional on our survival. He can have his surrender, his public humiliation of Maddox, all of it, but only if we walk away alive afterward. Otherwise, everyone learns what he is." Maddox was quiet for a long time, thinking it through from every angle. Then he sighed. "It's still a terrible plan, but it's the best terrible plan we've got." He looked around the table at each of them. "Everyone clear on what we're doing? We're betting everything on this. Our lives, the ranch, all of it. If it goes wrong, there's no second chance." "I'm in," Jack said immediately. "Me too," Thomas added. Samuel hesitated, then nodded. "If we're going down, might as well go down fighting." Marcus looked at his sister. "I'm in, whatever it takes." Evelyn nodded once. "Then we have 3 weeks to prepare. Time to make copies of those documents, to reach out to contacts, to plan every detail, and to train. Because if this turns into a fight, it'll make today look like a church social." They spent the rest of the evening planning. Who to contact, how to get messages out without Crow intercepting them, what to wear, and how to act, and where to position themselves at the party for maximum visibility and minimum vulnerability. It was intricate and fragile, a plan with 1,000 ways to fail and only one way to succeed. But it was a plan, and that was more than they'd had this morning. Late that night, after the others had bedded down in the cabin and the barn, Evelyn stood on the porch looking out at the mountains. The stars were bright and cold, and somewhere out there Crow was planning his next move, confident that time and resources were on his side. Maddox came out to join her, 2 cups of weak coffee in his hands. He gave her one, and they stood in silence for a while. "I'm scared," Evelyn admitted finally. "Not of dying, but of failing, of getting everyone killed for nothing." "That's what leadership feels like," Maddox said. "Permanent terror that you'll make the wrong call and people you care about will pay for it." "How do you stand it?" "I don't. I just keep moving forward because stopping is worse." He looked at her, and his expression was soft in the starlight. "You've changed, you know, since Red Hollow. You've become someone who makes impossible decisions and lives with the consequences. That's rare. You made me this way." "No, I gave you space to become it, but the strength was already there. Maddox set down his coffee, turned to face her fully. When this is over, if we survive, I want to ask you something. But I'm going to wait until we're not staring down death, because I want your answer to be about what you want, not what you're afraid of losing. Evelyn's heart beat faster. Ask me now. No. Maddox smiled slightly. Some things are worth waiting for, and I want to earn the right answer. He went back inside, leaving Evelyn alone with her thoughts and the cold mountain air. She stood there until the coffee went cold in her hands, until the stars wheeled overhead and the night started its slow turn toward dawn. In 3 weeks, everything would end, one way or another. And for the first time in her life, Evelyn Mercer felt ready for whatever came next. The letter took Evelyn 3 days to write. Each word had to be perfect, calculated to feed Crow's ego while hiding the trap beneath. She wrote it by lamplight while the others slept, crumpling draft after draft until her hands were stained with ink and the floor was littered with failures. I am writing to request a meeting, the final version read. Recent events have shown me the futility of continued resistance. My husband and I wish to discuss terms of settlement regarding the disputed land claims. I understand you are hosting a gathering on the 15th. Perhaps we might speak then, in the presence of territorial officials who can mediate fairly. I hope we can resolve this matter with dignity rather than further bloodshed. Respectfully, Evelyn Maddox. Maddox read it over her shoulder, his breath warm against her neck. He'll see through it. Maybe, but his pride won't let him refuse. He wants me broken and begging in front of an audience. Evelyn set down the pen. We're giving him exactly what he wants, just not the way he expects. And if he just shoots us the moment we arrive? Then Marcus's insurance policy kicks in. The documents get released, and Crow loses everything anyway. She turned to look at him. We've been over this. I know. Doesn't make it easier. Maddox picked up the letter, folded it carefully. I'll have Thomas ride to Stone Creek tomorrow. Send this from there. Less likely Crow's people are watching the telegraph office. Thomas left at dawn with the letter and copies of the most damaging documents, sealed in envelopes addressed to newspapers in 3 different territories. Instructions were simple. If Thomas didn't send word within a month, publish everything. It wasn't a perfect insurance policy, but it was something. The days that followed were strange. They worked the ranch as if they had a future, mending what the fight had damaged, caring for cattle that might not be theirs much longer. But underneath the routine was constant tension, the knowledge that in 2 weeks they'd either be free or dead. Marcus threw himself into the work with desperate energy, trying to prove his worth. He was clumsy at first, city-soft, and unused to physical labor, but he learned fast. Evelyn watched him haul water and chop wood and muck out stalls, and felt something complicated twist in her chest. This was the brother she remembered from childhood, before grief and alcohol had hollowed him out. The one who'd taught her to ride, who'd promised to protect her. She still didn't trust him, but she was starting to remember why she'd loved him once. One afternoon, while they were repairing fence together, Marcus broke the silence. I don't expect you to forgive me. Evelyn hammered a staple into wood, not looking at him. Good. But I need you to know I'm sorry. Not just for the gambling, for all of it, for being weak when you needed me to be strong, for choosing whiskey over family, for... His voice cracked. For what I let Crow do to you. He didn't do anything to me. I got out. Evelyn moved to the next post, her movements mechanical. Because a stranger saved you, not because your brother did. Marcus wiped his face with the back of his hand. I should have protected you, should have fought for you, but I was too much of a coward, and you paid for it. Yes, Evelyn's voice was flat. You were, and I did. I know I can't fix it, can't take it back. But if we survive this, I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be the person I should have been, the brother you deserved. Evelyn finally looked at him. Marcus's eyes were red-rimmed but clear, focused in a way they hadn't been in years. He meant it. She could see that. But meaning it and doing it were different things, and she'd learned not to trust promises. Prove it, she said. Don't tell me you've changed. Show me. Every day. For years. Then maybe, I'll believe you. Fair enough. Marcus picked up his hammer, went back to work. They didn't speak again, but the silence felt different, less hostile, more like a truce. Jack and Samuel spent hours teaching everyone to shoot faster, reload quicker, move as a unit. They drilled scenarios, what to do if shooting started, where to take cover, how to protect each other. It felt absurd, planning for a gunfight at a party, but absurd didn't mean impossible. Crow had already proven he'd use violence when it suited him. Remember, Jack said on the last day of training, we're not there to start a fight, we're there to end one. If bullets fly, it's because Crow made that choice, not us. So we make every shot count, we protect each other, and we make sure anyone watching knows who the aggressor is. Thomas returned a week before the party with news that made everyone's stomach drop. Crow had responded to Evelyn's letter with an open invitation published in the territorial newspaper. He'd framed it as magnanimous reconciliation, a powerful man offering grace to defeated enemies. The whole territory would be watching now, and Crow would be playing to an audience. He's even smarter than we thought, Maddox said, reading the newspaper announcement. He's made this public enough that we can't back out without looking like cowards, but he's also set the narrative. We're the ones surrendering, not him. We're coming to him for mercy. Then we use that, Evelyn said. Let him think he's won. Let him get comfortable. The harder the fall when we pull the rug out. They spent the final week preparing in ways that had nothing to do with guns or documents. Evelyn had one decent dress, the one she'd been married in, and she spent 2 days altering it to look more presentable. Marcus somehow procured a suit that almost fit. The others cleaned and mended their best clothes until they looked almost respectable. We need to look like we belong there, Maddox explained. Not like ranch hands crashing a party. Like equals. People don't listen to people they can dismiss. The night before they left, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, running through everything that could go wrong. Crow could have them arrested on sight. He could refuse to let them speak. He could have assassins waiting. He could have rigged the whole thing so thoroughly that their evidence never saw daylight. Or they could succeed. Could stand in front of witnesses and expose corruption that had poisoned the territory for years. Could destroy the man who'd tried to own her. Could walk away free. Both futures felt equally impossible. She heard Maddox moving around in the main room and got up, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. He was sitting at the table, cleaning his revolver by lamplight, the components spread out like pieces of a puzzle. Can't sleep either? She asked. Haven't slept well in years. Not since the war. Maddox didn't look up from his work. You get used to it. Evelyn sat down across from him. What was the war like? Loud, muddy, full of men doing terrible things to each other for reasons that stopped making sense after the first month. He reassembled the cylinder with practiced ease. I was 19 when I enlisted, thought I was going to save the country. By the time I mustered out, I was just glad to be alive. Is that why you came here, to the mountains? Partly. Mostly, I just wanted to be somewhere quiet, somewhere I could see threats coming from a long way off. He slid the cylinder back into place, spun it, then set the gun down. Built this ranch thinking I could create something permanent, something that wouldn't get torn apart by other people's wars. Guess I was wrong about that. You weren't wrong. Crow's the one who brought the war here, not you. Evelyn reached across the table, put her hand over his. And we're going to end it tomorrow. One way or another. Maddox turned his hand over, lacing his fingers with hers. I should have asked you this weeks ago, but I was waiting for the right moment. Then I realized there's no such thing as the right moment. There's just now. Asked me what? To stay. Not because of some contract or because you're running from something, but because you want to. His eyes met hers, vulnerable in a way she'd never seen. I love you, Evelyn. I think I've loved you since you showed up at that mill with one bag and more courage than sense. And if we survive tomorrow, I want you to stay at Iron Ridge, not as some business arrangement, as my wife. For real. Evelyn felt her breath catch. She'd known this was coming, had felt it building between them through months of shared work and shared danger. But hearing him say it out loud made it real in a way that terrified and thrilled her. You don't have to answer now, Maddox said quickly. I just needed you to know, before tomorrow, in case I love you too. The words came out rushed, almost angry. I've been trying not to because it seems stupid to fall in love with someone when I was supposed to leave in a year, but I did anyway. And yes, I want to stay. Not because I have nowhere else to go, but because this is home. You made it home. Maddox stood, pulled her to her feet, and kissed her. It was nothing like the chaste peck they'd exchanged at their wedding, all paperwork and strangers. This was real, fierce, full of months of denied wanting and the knowledge that tomorrow might take everything away. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Evelyn rested her forehead against his. "We survive tomorrow. Then we build that future. Deal?" "Deal." They stayed up until dawn, talking about everything and nothing, making plans for a ranch they might not live to see again. When the sun finally broke over the mountains, painting everything gold and red, Evelyn felt strangely calm. Whatever happened today, at least she'd have this moment of certainty before the world tilted again. The others were already awake, checking weapons, going over the plan one final time. They'd ride together to Crow's ranch, arriving in mid-afternoon when the party would be in full swing. They'd stay together, always within sight of each other. They'd wait for the right moment, when the most witnesses were present, before presenting their evidence. And if shooting started, they'd fight their way out or die trying. "Everyone ready?" Maddox asked as they saddled horses in the pre-dawn cold. Jack checked his rifle one last time. "As we'll ever be." Samuel looked sick but determined. "Let's finish this." Thomas just nodded, jaw set. Marcus met Evelyn's eyes. "Thank you for giving me a chance to do this right." "Don't thank me yet," Evelyn said. "Save it for when we're all still breathing tonight." They rode out as the sun climbed higher, 6 people heading toward a confrontation that would end in triumph or tragedy. The mountains watched them go, eternal and indifferent, and Evelyn wondered if they'd see this valley again. The ride to Crow's ranch took most of the day. They traveled in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, their own fears. The landscape changed as they descended from the high country. Fewer pines, more open grassland, signs of civilization encroaching. They passed other ranches, saw distant cattle, encountered a supply wagon heading north. Life going on as if this was just another day. Maybe it was, for everyone else. For them, it was Judgment Day. Crow's ranch appeared in late afternoon, sprawling and ostentatious in a way that made Iron Ridge look humble by comparison. The main house was practically a mansion, 3 stories of imported lumber and glass windows. Outbuildings dotted the property, bunkhouses, barns, stables, a separate building that might have been an office. Fences stretched in every direction, well-maintained and expensive. This was what money bought. Power made visible. Dozens of horses and carriages crowded the yard. People in fine clothes moved between buildings, laughing and drinking. It looked more like a territorial capital social event than a ranch party, which was exactly the point. This was Crow showing off his influence, his connections, his control. They tied their horses at the edge of the crowd and walked toward the main house together. Evelyn felt every eye turn toward them, felt conversations die and restart in whispers. They were the spectacle now, the defeated enemies coming to beg for mercy. Let them think that. Let Crow think that. A man in a suit intercepted them at the door. Some kind of servant or assistant. "Names?" "Colt and Evelyn Maddox," Maddox said evenly. "We're expected." The man's eyebrows rose slightly. "Indeed. Mr. Crow is in the main hall. Please, follow me." He led them through a house that screamed wealth, polished wood floors, paintings on the walls, furniture that cost more than most people made in a year. Other guests watched them pass, some with curiosity, some with contempt, some with the calculation of people wondering which side to be on when the dust settled. The main hall was enormous, packed with perhaps 100 people. Territorial officials in their formal wear, judges and marshals and land office clerks, wealthy ranchers and merchants. Everyone who mattered in this part of the territory all gathered to watch Crow's victory. And there, at the far end of the room, standing beneath a chandelier that probably cost a fortune, was Silas Crow himself. He saw them enter, and his smile was pure predator satisfaction. "Mr. Maddox!" Crow's voice carried across the room, silencing other conversations. "How gracious of you to accept my invitation. And Mrs. Maddox." His eyes lingered on Evelyn in a way that made her skin crawl. "How lovely to see you again. I trust you've been well?" "Well enough," Evelyn said. Her voice didn't shake. She'd practiced for this, drilled herself until she could face him without flinching. "Please, come in. Join us. We're all friends here." Crow gestured expansively, the gracious host. "I understand you wish to discuss the unfortunate dispute regarding your land." "That's right." Maddox's hand rested on Evelyn's back, a subtle claim of partnership. We hope to find a peaceful resolution, with witnesses present to ensure fairness. Of course, of course. I am nothing if not fair. Crow moved through the crowd like royalty, people stepping aside automatically. I'll admit, I was surprised by your letter, Mrs. Maddox. Pleased, but surprised. I had thought you quite set on defying me. Circumstances change, Evelyn said. We all must recognize when continued resistance serves no purpose. How wise. Crow's smile widened. Perhaps you're more sensible than I gave you credit for. Your brother certainly wasn't. Marcus stiffened beside Evelyn, but he kept his mouth shut. They'd rehearsed this part too. Let Crow gloat, let him feel superior. Don't give him any reason to escalate before they were ready. I assume you have terms? Maddox asked. Simple ones. You sign over the deed to Iron Ridge to me, compensating for the losses I've incurred in this unfortunate affair. In return, I'll forget the matter of the men you killed during your unlawful resistance. No charges filed, a clean slate for everyone. That seems rather one-sided. Does it? Crow's voice hardened. You killed 3 of my men, Maddox, wounded others. You're lucky I'm offering terms at all rather than having you hanged for murder. Self-defense isn't murder. Maddox's voice stayed level despite the provocation. They came onto my land with weapons drawn. That's not how Marshal Morrison remembers it, isn't that right, Marshal? Morrison stepped forward from the crowd, looking uncomfortable but committed. My report states that you fired first, Maddox. Unprovoked assault on lawful officers. That's a lie, and everyone here knows it. Jack's voice was hard. We were defending our home from armed invaders. Mind your tongue, Crow snapped. You're a guest here only by my sufferance. Then maybe we should stop being guests. Maddox pulled the folded documents from inside his coat. Because we didn't come here to surrender. We came here to present evidence of fraud, bribery, and corruption spanning the past 5 years. The room went silent. Crow's smile froze. Evidence? His voice was dangerously quiet. Letters in your handwriting detailing payments to territorial officials. Ledgers showing bribes to marshals, judges, claim officers. Testimony from witnesses you intimidated. All of it documented, dated, verified. Maddox held up the papers. You've been running a criminal enterprise, Crow. Stealing land, destroying lives, and buying off anyone who might stop you, and now everyone in this room knows it. Crow's face went purple with rage. You dare! You come into my home and accuse me! The evidence speaks for itself. Evelyn's voice cut through his bluster. You tried to buy me like property. When that failed, you tried to steal the land we'd built. And when that failed, you tried to have us killed. All illegal. All documented. All witnessed by people in this room who've been too afraid to speak up until now. She looked around at the assembled guests, saw uncertainty in their faces. Fear, yes, but also something else. The beginning of doubt. The crack in Crow's armor. Some of you have lost land to this man, Evelyn continued. Some of you have paid him protection money. Some of you have watched him destroy good people and said nothing because you were afraid. But he only has power as long as we give it to him, as long as we stay silent. This is ridiculous, Crow snarled. Morrison, arrest these people for slander and trespassing. Morrison looked uncertain. Sir, if they have evidence, they have nothing, forgeries and lies. But there was panic in Crow's voice now, the sound of a man watching his empire crack. Then you won't mind if we present the documents to a federal marshal for review? Maddox's voice was calm, reasonable. If they're forgeries, it'll be proven quickly enough, but if they're real, and they are, then you're finished. A man stepped forward from the crowd, older, well-dressed, with the bearing of someone used to authority. I'm Judge Harrison from the Territorial Court. I'd like to see these documents. So would I. Another man, this one wearing a marshal's badge that wasn't Morrison's. Federal Marshal Coleman, stationed in Cheyenne. I've heard rumors about irregularities in this district for months. If you have proof, I'd very much like to examine it. Crow looked between them, and Evelyn saw the moment he realized he'd lost. The moment he understood that the game was over, that the witnesses he'd assembled to watch his triumph had become his jury, and that's when everything went wrong. Crow's hand dropped to his hip, fast as a snake, coming up with a derringer that had been hidden under his coat. He aimed it straight at Evelyn, and she saw murder in his eyes. Not strategy, not calculation, just pure animal rage. "If I can't have you," Crow hissed, "nobody will." The world slowed. Evelyn saw his finger tighten on the trigger, saw the muzzle lined up with her heart, saw Maddox moving, too slow, too far away, saw Marcus lunging forward, finally fast enough to matter. Her brother hit her from the side, knocking her down, and the Derringer fired with a crack that echoed through the hall. Something wet splashed across Evelyn's face, and she heard Marcus make a sound, a small, surprised grunt, as his weight collapsed onto her. Then everything was chaos. People screaming, running for exits, Morrison going for his gun, Jack and Thomas moving to protect their group. And Maddox, his face transformed into something terrible, charging straight at Crow. He hit Crow like a freight train, driving him into the wall. The Derringer fell, and then it was just fists and rage. Maddox beating Crow with a fury that Evelyn had never seen. Crow tried to fight back, but he'd never been in a real fight in his life. He'd always had men to do his violence for him. Now he was alone, and Maddox was showing him what real violence looked like. Marshal Coleman and several other men finally pulled Maddox off, but not before Crow's face was a bloody ruin. The land baron collapsed to the floor, gasping and broken, his expensive suit torn and stained. Evelyn barely noticed. She was cradling Marcus, trying to stop the blood pumping from the hole in his chest. His eyes were wide, frightened, but also somehow peaceful. "Evie," he whispered. Did I do good?" "You did good," she sobbed. "You saved me. You stupid, brave idiot, you saved me." "Finally." Marcus smiled, blood on his teeth. "Finally got it right." "Don't you dare," Evelyn said fiercely. "Don't you dare die on me. Not now. Not when you finally—" But Marcus's eyes were already going distant, his breathing shallow and rattling. She felt the exact moment he left, felt the life go out of him, and something inside her broke open and bled. Around her, Marshal Coleman was arresting Crow, reading charges that would probably see him hanged. Judge Harrison was securing the documents, promising full investigation. Morrison was being questioned about his role. The whole corrupt system was collapsing, exactly as they'd planned. But Evelyn didn't care about any of it. She just held her brother and cried while Maddox knelt beside her, his arms around them both. And the guests who'd come to watch a spectacle got one they'd never forget. Marcus Mercer, the drunk who'd gambled his sister away, had died saving her life. And Silas Crow, the most feared man in the territory, was being dragged away in chains. They buried Marcus 3 days later on a hillside overlooking Iron Ridge, in a spot where the morning sun hit first and the evening shadows came last. The ground was still half frozen, and digging took hours, but Maddox and Jack refused help from anyone else. It was the kind of labor that gave grief somewhere to go, something physical to push against when the weight of loss became unbearable. Evelyn stood at the graveside in her black dress, the same one she'd worn to her parents' funerals, and wondered why some families seemed destined to bury each other piece by piece. The sky was cloudless and blue, offensively beautiful for a day that should have been gray and weeping. But weather didn't care about human sorrow. The world just kept turning, regardless of who fell off. Thomas and Samuel stood nearby, hats in hand. Judge Harrison had made the journey up from the territorial capital, along with Marshal Coleman. A handful of other ranchers had come too, men who'd lost land or pride or family to Crow's schemes and wanted to pay respects to someone who'd helped bring him down. It was more people than Evelyn had expected. Marcus had died a drunk and a coward in most eyes, but he'd also died a hero, and apparently that counted for something. "Anyone want to say anything?" Maddox asked quietly. Evelyn stepped forward. She'd been thinking about what to say for 3 days, running through speeches in her head while lying awake at night. But now, standing here with dirt under her nails and exhaustion in her bones, all the pretty words felt hollow. "My brother was a mess," she said finally. Her voice was rough from crying. "He was weak and selfish, and he destroyed almost everything he touched. He gambled away our family's future. He sold me to a monster. For years I hated him for it, wished he was dead. And then, when it mattered most, he threw himself in front of a bullet meant for me. I don't know how to hold both of those truths at the same time. That he was terrible and brave. That he failed me and saved me. Maybe I'm not supposed to reconcile it. Maybe people are just complicated, and we do the best we can with the broken pieces we've been given. She knelt, put her hand on the plain wooden coffin they'd built. I forgive you, Marcus. Not because you earned it, but because carrying hate is too heavy, and I'm tired. I hope wherever you are, you finally found peace. You never had much of it here. She stood, stepped back. Maddox squeezed her hand, and they lowered Marcus into the ground, while the wind moved through the pines, and somewhere distant, a hawk cried out, hunting or celebrating or just being alive in the way wild things were. After the grave was filled and the others had gone back to the ranch, Evelyn stayed. Maddox stayed with her, not speaking, just present. They sat on the hillside as the sun tracked west, painting the valley in shades of gold and amber. You think he knew? Evelyn asked eventually. That he was going to die? That saving me would cost him everything? I think in that moment, he just saw his sister in danger and did the only thing that mattered. Maddox picked up a handful of dirt, let it sift through his fingers. People are capable of remarkable things when they stop thinking and just act. Maybe that's all heroism is. Not thinking, just doing. He wasted so much time. Most people do. We get so caught up in our own misery, our own failures, that we forget we're still alive, still capable of choosing differently. Maddox looked at her. Your brother made a lot of wrong choices, but his last one was right. That has to count for something. Does it balance out? All the wrong against that one, right? I don't know if life works that way. I don't think there's some cosmic ledger keeping score. Maddox was quiet for a moment. But I think people can change, not completely, not into someone totally different, but enough. Enough to matter when it counts. Evelyn leaned against him, and they watched the sun set over the valley that had almost cost them everything. Below, the ranch looked small and fragile, a tiny human mark on vast wilderness. But it was theirs. They'd fought for it, bled for it, almost died for it, and now it was truly, finally, theirs. The legal proceedings took weeks. Judge Harrison convened a special territorial court to examine the evidence Marcus had provided, and what they found was worse than anyone had imagined. Crow's corruption ran deep, involving not just land theft, but murder, extortion, witness intimidation, and fraud on a scale that shocked even hardened officials. The documents showed payments to marshals, judges, claim office clerks, even a territorial senator. The whole system had been rotten, and Crow had been the rot. Marshal Coleman arrested 14 men in connection with the scheme. Morrison was among them, his career and freedom gone for the price of Crow's bribes. Others fled the territory entirely, abandoning positions and property rather than face trial. The territorial governor himself was implicated, though he resigned before charges could be filed. Crow went to trial in late spring. The proceeding took 3 days, and Evelyn testified on the second day, telling the court about the night Marcus gambled her away, about Crow's threats, about the attempt on their lives at Iron Ridge. The defense attorney tried to paint her as a willing participant, suggested she'd left with Maddox to escape debts of her own. But the evidence was too overwhelming and Evelyn's testimony too clear. The jury deliberated for less than an hour, guilty on all counts. Crow was sentenced to hang, along with 2 of his top lieutenants. The execution was scheduled for June 15th, exactly 1 year after Evelyn had left Red Hollow. She didn't attend, neither did Maddox. They'd already given Crow enough of their lives. They wouldn't give him their final moments too. But on the morning of the execution, while they were working in the high pasture, Evelyn felt something shift inside her. A weight she hadn't realized she was carrying suddenly lighter. Not gone. Never gone. But manageable. It's done, she said. Maddox didn't ask what she meant. He just nodded, and they went back to work, fixing fence under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. The Territorial Land Office reviewed every deed Crow had filed in the past decade. Dozens were fraudulent, signed by officials who'd taken bribes or been intimidated into compliance. Properties were returned to their original owners or their families. Some of those families had been driven out of the territory entirely and had to be tracked down through months of correspondence. Others had died, and the land passed to distant relatives who'd never seen it. Iron Ridge's deed was examined 3 separate times by 3 different officials, all determined to ensure no future disputes. Each time it was verified as legitimate, properly purchased, legally held. Maddox owned the ranch free and clear. always had. Crow's claims had been nothing but smoke and threats backed by corrupt enforcement. 600 acres, the final land officer said, handing over the verified documents. All yours, Mr. Maddox. Congratulations on your victory. But it hadn't felt like victory when Marcus died on a mansion floor. It hadn't felt like victory during the nights Evelyn woke up gasping, reliving the moment that bullet tore through her brother. Victory was supposed to feel good. This just felt like survival with a higher body count. Still, they rebuilt. That's what people did. They survived and rebuilt and tried to make something worthwhile from the wreckage. Jack and Samuel stayed on through the summer, helping restore what the winter and the fighting had damaged. Thomas left for Colorado to start his own spread, promising to visit. Other ranch hands drifted through, looking for work, and Maddox hired carefully, paying fair wages and treating people with the dignity Crow never had. The ranch prospered. Cattle prices were good that year, and the herd Maddox had protected through winter fetched premium rates. They paid off debts, bought equipment, made improvements that had been delayed for years. The barn got a new roof. The cabin got an addition, turning one cramped room into actual living space. They built a proper bunkhouse for the hands, with real beds and a stove. Evelyn threw herself into the work with intensity that bordered on desperate. She learned bookkeeping, took over the ranch accounts, started corresponding with buyers and suppliers. She rode fence lines until she knew every inch of the property. She worked until exhaustion made sleep possible, because sleep without exhaustion meant dreams. And dreams meant watching Marcus die over and over while she stood helpless. Maddox noticed, of course. He always noticed. But he didn't push, didn't force her to talk before she was ready. He just stayed close, a steady presence that asked for nothing but offered everything. One evening in late June, after a long day moving cattle to summer pasture, they sat on the porch watching the stars emerge. The air smelled like pine and approaching rain. Somewhere down the valley, coyotes were singing. "I can't stop thinking about the what-ifs," Evelyn said suddenly. What if Marcus had moved faster? What if Crow had aimed differently? What if I'd written a different letter, made a different plan? Maybe he'd still be alive. Maybe, Maddox said, or maybe we'd all be dead. You can drive yourself crazy with what-ifs. I know, but I keep doing it anyway. That's grief. It doesn't follow logic. Maddox was quiet for a moment. After the war, I spent years going over every decision, every order I gave, wondering if different choices would have saved the men who died. Eventually, I realized I was asking the wrong question. It wasn't about whether I could have saved them. It was about whether I honored their sacrifice by doing something worthwhile with the life they helped preserve. Evelyn turned to look at him. And did you? I'm trying, every day. That's all any of us can do. He took her hand. Your brother gave his life so you could have yours. The question isn't whether you could have saved him, it's what you're going to do with the future he bought you. I don't know if I deserve it. Deserve's got nothing to do with it. You have it. The only question is what you do next. What she did next was marry Maddox again, properly this time, in a ceremony that had nothing to do with legal necessity and everything to do with choice. They held it in late August, when the high country was at its peak, wildflowers turning the meadows into rivers of color. Jack stood as witness. Samuel played fiddle. A dozen ranchers and their families made the journey up from the valley, along with Judge Harrison and Marshal Coleman, men who'd become unlikely friends through shared crisis. The ceremony was simple. No fancy words, no elaborate promises. Just two people standing on a mountainside, choosing each other in front of witnesses who mattered. I've already got the ring, Maddox said, looking at the gold band Evelyn hadn't removed since Stone Creek. Already got the papers, but I wanted this. Wanted you to know that every day I wake up and choose you again. Not because of a contract, not because we survived something together, but because you're the person I want beside me when things are good, and when things are terrible, and in all the boring moments in between. Evelyn felt tears on her cheeks, but they were good tears for once. I came here running from one nightmare and thought I was walking into another, but you gave me something I'd never had before. You gave me choice. You gave me partnership. You gave me a home, and I'm choosing to stay. Not because I'm trapped, but because there's nowhere else I'd rather be. They kissed while the wind moved through the pines and the guests cheered, and for the first time since Marcus died, Evelyn felt something like happiness break through the grief. The celebration lasted until dark, people eating and drinking and telling stories. Someone produced a harmonica, and there was clumsy dancing that made everyone laugh. It wasn't fancy or elegant. It was just real people having a real moment, and that made it perfect in ways no elaborate affair could have matched. When the guests finally left and the ranch quieted down, Evelyn and Maddox stood on their porch, watching the last wagons disappear down the valley road. Above them, the Milky Way sprawled across the sky, infinite and indifferent and beautiful. "What are you thinking about?" Maddox asked. "That I'm happy, and that happiness feels dangerous, like something that can be taken away." Evelyn leaned against him. "Every time things get good, something terrible happens. My parents die. Marcus destroys everything. Crow shows up. I'm waiting for the next disaster. There probably will be one. Life's like that. But there will also be good days, boring days. Days where nothing much happens except we're alive and together and the cattle don't escape." Maddox kissed the top of her head. "You can't live your life braced for impact. Eventually you have to trust that you're strong enough to handle whatever comes." "Am I? Strong enough? You survived Red Hollow, survived winter, survived a firefight and a corrupt system and watching your brother die. You're the strongest person I know." He turned her to face him. "And you're not alone. Whatever comes next, we face it together. That's what partnership means." Evelyn kissed him, and they went inside to start the rest of their lives. Autumn came with its usual fireworks of color. The aspens turned gold, the oaks turned red, and the high country blazed like someone had set the mountains on fire. They worked through the season, preparing for another winter, but this time there was no dread. Just the satisfaction of competent preparation, of knowing they'd survived worse and could handle whatever came. Letters arrived from various territories, people who'd read about Crow's trial and wanted to share their own stories of his corruption. Families whose land had been stolen, businesses he'd destroyed, women he'd terrorized. The full scope of his damage would probably never be fully known, but Evelyn kept the letters anyway, filed them carefully, evidence that what they'd done mattered beyond their own survival. One letter came from a lawyer in San Francisco representing Crow's estate. With Crow dead and his assets seized, everything was being liquidated to compensate victims. Evelyn was entitled to significant restitution for the trauma and danger she'd endured. The amount mentioned made her dizzy. "We don't need it," she said to Maddox. "We're doing fine. It's not about need. It's about justice. He hurt you. This is acknowledgement of that." Maddox looked at the figure on the paper. "But it's your choice what we do with it." Evelyn thought about it for a week. Then she wrote back to the lawyer with instructions. Half the money would go to establishing a fund for women fleeing dangerous situations, helping them start over in new territories with new names if needed. The other half would fund a school in Red Hollow, so kids like she'd been had options beyond poverty or selling themselves to survive. She kept nothing for herself. The money felt tainted, and she wanted no part of it beyond using it to help others escape the kind of trap she'd barely survived. When word got back about what she'd done, newspapers across the territory ran stories. The woman who brought down Silas Crow was using his seized fortune to help others. Donations poured in from people who wanted to support the cause. Within months, the fund had helped 17 women escape abusive situations, and the school in Red Hollow had broken ground. Evelyn didn't want the attention, but she answered every letter that arrived asking for help. She knew what it felt like to be trapped. If she could throw a rope to someone else drowning, she would. Winter came again, as it always did, but this time they were ready. Supplies stocked, firewood stacked, cattle moved to protected pastures. And when the first snow fell, blanketing the valley in white, Evelyn stood on the porch and felt something she'd never experienced before. Peace, not the absence of problems. There were still hard days, still moments when grief ambushed her and she had to stop whatever she was doing and just breathe through it. Still nights when she dreamed of gunfire and blood and couldn't fall back asleep. Still times when the isolation of the mountains pressed in and she missed having people around, missed conversation that didn't revolve around cattle and weather. But underneath all of that was something solid, a foundation that hadn't existed before. The knowledge that she belonged somewhere, to someone, and that belonging was chosen, not forced. Spring brought new calves and longer days and the slow greening of the valley. It also brought a discovery that changed everything again. Evelyn had been feeling strange for weeks, tired in a way that sleep didn't fix, queasy in the mornings. She'd dismissed it as lingering stress, maybe illness. But when she missed her monthly cycle, then missed it again, the truth became unavoidable. She was pregnant. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She stood in the barn where she'd gone to check on a horse, one hand on her stomach, trying to process what this meant. A baby. A child who would grow up in these mountains, learning to ride and shoot and survive like she had. A child who would never know what it felt like to be sold, to be property, to be trapped. Terror and joy warred inside her. She'd never thought about children, never planned for them. But now that this was happening, she wanted it with an intensity that surprised her. She found Maddox in the north pasture, repairing fence. He looked up when she approached, saw something in her face, and immediately stopped working. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong." Evelyn smiled, and it felt genuine. "But something's different. I'm pregnant." Maddox stood there, hammer in hand, looking like she'd just spoken a foreign language. Then slowly, carefully, he set down his tools and pulled her into his arms. "You're sure?" "As sure as I can be without a doctor, but yes, I'm sure." "A baby." Maddox said it like he was testing the word, seeing how it felt. Then he laughed, surprised and delighted, and picked her up and spun her around while she shrieked protest. "We're having a baby." "Put me down, you idiot! You'll drop me." "Never." But he set her down gently, hands on her shoulders, looking at her with wonder. "Are you happy? Is this what you want?" "I don't know if I'm ready, but yes, I want this. I want us." Evelyn put her hand over his. "Our child will grow up free, loved, safe. Everything we didn't have, we can give them that. We will give them that." Maddox's voice was fierce with promise. "Whatever it takes, this child will never know what you survived, will never feel trapped or owned or afraid. I swear it." They stood in the pasture holding each other while cattle grazed nearby, and the mountains watched over them, ancient and protective. And Evelyn felt the future unfold in her mind, uncertain but no longer terrifying. She saw a child running through these meadows, learning to ride, learning that the world could be harsh but also beautiful, learning that people could be complicated and broken and still choose to be better. The pregnancy was hard, morning sickness that lasted all day, exhaustion that made even simple tasks feel monumental. But Evelyn worked through it because that's what she did. She worked through everything. Maddox tried to make her rest, kept insisting she was doing too much, but she ignored him until he gave up and just started doing twice the work himself to compensate. "You're going to burn yourself out," she told him one evening. "Says the woman who was up at dawn checking fence despite throwing up 3 times last night." "That's different." "How?" "Because I'm stubborn." "So am I." Maddox grinned. "Guess the kid doesn't stand a chance. 2 stubborn parents. They'll probably be impossible." "Probably," Evelyn smiled back. "But they'll survive anything. That's worth something." The baby came in early December, during the first major snowstorm of the season. The doctor couldn't make it up from Stone Creek in time, so it was just Evelyn and Maddox and Jack, who delivered enough calves and foals to have some idea of what to do, even if humans were different. It took 14 hours. 14 hours of pain that made Evelyn understand why some women died in childbirth, why this was considered dangerous even with medical help. She screamed at Maddox, cursed him for getting her pregnant, swore she'd never do this again. And through it all, he held her hand and didn't flinch, even when she squeezed hard enough to leave bruises. And then, finally, a baby's cry cut through the cabin, high and angry and alive. "It's a girl," Jack said, his voice rough with emotion. "A healthy baby girl." Maddox cut the cord with shaking hands while Jack cleaned the baby and wrapped her in blankets. Then he placed the small bundle in Evelyn's arms, and the world stopped. The baby was tiny, wrinkled, covered in vernix and blood. Her eyes were scrunched shut, her fists waving in outrage at being evicted from warmth into cold. She was the most beautiful thing Evelyn had ever seen. "Hello," Evelyn whispered. "Hello, little one. Welcome to Iron Ridge." The baby opened her eyes, startlingly blue, like her father's, and seemed to study Evelyn's face. Then she yawned, showing toothless gums, and Evelyn felt her heart crack open in a way that was painful and perfect. "What should we name her?" Maddox asked. He was crying, not bothering to hide it, one finger stroking the baby's tiny hand. Evelyn thought about the people who'd brought her here. Her parents, who'd tried their best with limited resources. Marcus, who'd failed and redeemed himself in the final moment. All the people who died so she could live, so this child could exist. Hope, she said. Her name is Hope, because that's what she represented. Not the naive kind of hope that thought the world was fair or safe or kind, but the stubborn, hard-won hope that said even after everything, even after all the loss and pain and fear, something good could still grow, something worth protecting, something worth fighting for. Maddox kissed Evelyn's forehead, then the baby's. Hope Maddox, perfect. Jack slipped out quietly, giving them privacy, and the new family sat together by the fire, while snow fell outside and the baby slept, unaware of the world she'd been born into, unaware of the struggles that had led to this moment, just alive and warm and safe in her mother's arms. Years passed the way they do, marked by seasons and growth and the small triumphs and failures that make up a life. Hope grew into a wild, fearless child who learned to ride before she could properly walk and who asked endless questions about everything. She was smart and stubborn and had her father's eyes and her mother's determination, a combination that promised future trouble for everyone. More children followed. A boy they named Thomas, after the ranch hand who'd ridden through storms to warn them of Crow's approach. Twin girls they named Sarah and Emma, who were opposites from birth, Sarah quiet and thoughtful, Emma loud and adventurous. Each birth was hard, and after Emma and Sarah, Evelyn declared she was done. 4 children were plenty. Maddox didn't argue. He'd almost lost her during the twins' birth, and that fear never completely left him. The ranch continued to prosper. They expanded the herd, bought adjoining property when it became available, built a real house to replace the cramped cabin. It wasn't fancy, but it was solid and spacious, with room for a growing family and the hands they employed. Jack stayed on permanently, becoming part of the family in all but name. The kids called him Uncle Jack, and he taught them to shoot and track and survive in the wilderness that would always be part of their home. Evelyn's fund for women continued to grow, helping dozens escape dangerous situations. The school in Red Hollow thrived, producing the territory's first female doctor and several successful businesswomen. Evelyn corresponded with many of them, offering advice and encouragement, a voice from the wilderness telling them that survival was possible, that strength could be learned, that freedom was worth fighting for. She never forgot where she came from, never let the prosperity of Iron Ridge erase the memory of the frightened girl in Red Hollow, sold like property, desperate for escape. That girl lived inside her always, a reminder of what was at stake every time someone asked for help. Sometimes, usually at night when the children were asleep and the ranch was quiet, Evelyn would stand on the porch and look out at the valley that had become her kingdom. She'd think about the journey that brought her here, about all the moments that could have ended differently. If Maddox hadn't been in that saloon, if she hadn't accepted his offer, if Marcus hadn't found the courage to change, if any of 1,000 small choices had gone another way, she'd be dead or broken or trapped in a life that wasn't hers. Instead, she was here, free, loved, building something that would outlast her. On Hope's 10th birthday, Evelyn took her daughter up to the hillside where Marcus was buried. The grave was well maintained, marked by a simple stone that read, Marcus Mercer, brother, hero, complicated. Who was he? Hope asked. She'd heard stories, but children that age struggled to understand people as anything but simple categories, good or bad, hero or villain. He was my brother, your uncle. Evelyn knelt beside the grave, pulling weeds that had grown around the stone. He made terrible mistakes, hurt people he loved. But in the end, he tried to do better. And his last act was saving me, which means he saved you too, because without me, there's no you. Was he good or bad? Both. Neither. People aren't that simple, sweetheart. Evelyn looked at her daughter, seeing Marcus's nose, her mother's chin, her father's eyes, all the genetic inheritance that made a person. Your uncle taught me that people can change. Not completely, but enough. Enough to matter when it counts, and that's the best most of us can hope for. Hope thought about this seriously, the way she thought about everything. Will you tell me about him? The real stories, not just that he was a hero. When you're older, when you can understand that loving someone doesn't mean pretending they were perfect. Evelyn stood, brushed dirt from her knees. Come on, your father's making a cake, and if we're not there to supervise, he'll burn it. They walked back down the hillside hand in hand, and Evelyn felt the circle complete itself. The girl who'd been sold had become the woman who saved others. The woman who'd been trapped had built a legacy of freedom. The person who'd almost lost everything had created something worth keeping. That evening, the whole family gathered for Hope's birthday. The kids ran wild while the adults tried and failed to maintain order. Cake was eaten, presents were opened, stories were told. Jack played his harmonica while Maddox danced with each of his daughters, making them shriek with laughter. And Evelyn watched it all from the porch, this loud, chaotic, imperfect family she'd helped create, and felt a contentment so deep it bordered on pain. Maddox found her there as the sun set, painting the valley in impossible colors. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, sliding an arm around her waist. "That I'm grateful. For all of it. Even the terrible parts, because they led here." Evelyn leaned into him. "You asked me once what I'd do with the future Marcus bought me. I think this is the answer. This family. This home. This life where people choose to stay instead of being forced to." "You built it," Maddox said. "I gave you space, but you did the work." "We built it together. That's the whole point." She turned to kiss him, and it still felt like that first real kiss, full of promise and possibility. "You know what the best part is?" "What?" "We survived. Not just the obvious things, Crow and the fighting and winter, but the smaller deaths, the grief, the fear, the moments when giving up would have been easier. We survived all of it, and we made something beautiful anyway." "Is that the moral of the story?" Maddox smiled. "Survive and build something beautiful? Maybe. Or maybe it's simpler than that." Evelyn looked out at the valley, at the ranch they'd defended, at the mountains that had witnessed everything. "Maybe it's just that freedom is worth fighting for. That partnership is stronger than ownership. That people can be broken and still become whole. That love, real love, the kind you choose, is the only thing that makes survival worthwhile." "That's a lot of morals. Life's complicated. Morals should be too." Evelyn pulled him toward the house, where their children were calling for them. "Come on, they're probably destroying something." "Probably." But Maddox followed without hesitation, the way he'd been following her lead since the day he offered her an impossible choice in the darkness outside Red Hollow. And as they rejoined the chaos of their family, the noise and laughter and love that filled every corner of the home they'd built, Evelyn felt the final piece of her old self fall away. The frightened girl who'd been sold was gone. The woman who'd survived winter was gone. Even the fighter who'd faced down Crow was gone. What remained was simply Evelyn Maddox, wife, mother, rancher, survivor. Free woman who'd taken the worst hand life could deal and played it into something worth living for. The mountains stood watch as they always had, eternal and indifferent. But the valley below them was alive with human persistence, with the stubborn refusal to let circumstance dictate destiny. And in that small ranch at the foot of Iron Ridge, 6 people proved every day that the future wasn't written by the powerful or the cruel or the ones with all the advantages. It was written by the ones who refused to quit, who chose partnership over domination, who understood that survival wasn't enough. You had to build something worth surviving for. Years later, when Hope was grown and running her own spread on the western edge of the property, she asked her mother one final question. "Do you ever regret it? The way everything happened? Wish it could have been easier?" Evelyn was older now, gray threading through her dark hair, lines around her eyes from years of squinting into sun and wind. But she was still strong, still capable, still the woman who'd faced down a territory's worth of corruption and won. "Every day," she said honestly, "I wish Marcus hadn't needed to die. I wish my parents had lived long enough to see this place, to meet you. I wish I'd never known what it felt like to be sold like property." "But," Hope prompted, sensing there was more, "but I also know that easy roads don't build strong people. Pain is a terrible teacher, but it teaches lessons that last." Evelyn looked at her daughter, this fierce young woman who'd never known real fear, who'd grown up free and loved and safe. "You're the proof that it was worth it. You and your siblings. You'll never understand what it means to not own yourself, because we fought to make sure you never had to. That's not a legacy of money or land. It's a legacy of freedom. And that's the only inheritance that matters." Hope hugged her mother, and Evelyn held her tight, this miracle she'd created, and thought about all the women who'd never escaped their own red hollows. All the people still trapped by circumstance or cruelty or the casual evil of those with power. She couldn't save them all, but she'd saved herself, and she'd helped save dozens of others, and she'd raised children who understood that freedom was something you fought for, not something you were given. That would have to be enough. As the sun set over Iron Ridge Ranch one more time, painting the world in gold and shadow, Evelyn Maddox stood on the porch of the home she'd built and felt the weight of her years settle comfortably on her shoulders. She'd been a daughter, a sister, a wife, a mother. She'd been property, and she'd been free. She'd watched people die and helped others live. She'd survived, and more than that, she'd lived. And in the end, maybe that was the only story that mattered. Not the dramatic rescues or the gunfights or the courtroom victories, but the quiet triumph of a woman who'd been sold for $3,000 and gambled everything on an impossible hope, winning not just her freedom, but a future worth living. The mountains watched, eternal and knowing. And somewhere in the wind that moved through the pines, if you listened carefully, you could almost hear the whisper of everyone who'd fought for this moment. Marcus, giving his life. Maddox, offering choice when none existed. All the women who'd escaped because Evelyn showed them it was possible. Their voices carried on the wind, singing the only truth that mattered. You are not what was done to you. You are what you chose to become. And Evelyn Maddox, born Evelyn Mercer, once sold as payment for a gambling debt, had chosen to become free. That was enough. That was everything.